Binks Sake is the story of Joy Boy, one that was masterfully implemented by Oda, and we've recently seen a lot of what's actually being described in the lyrics coming to fruition in the modern day, which threatens to simultaneously spoil the long-awaited history of Joy Boy, as well as the much longer-awaited future of Luffy. It is a stupidly good song. And who wrote Binks Sake? Why, that would be Eiichiro Oda, which isn't usually the case for iconic One Piece songs, even in the manga. For example, Let's Go See Master Nekomamushi, the song sung by Brook in chapter 814, was written by Brook's voice actor Cho, and it was written long before Oda even planned to have the Nekomamushi character, who was drawn specifically as a result of Cho's song. And even further back, the Sogeking theme that first appears in chapter 368 was created by Usopp's voice actor Kappa Yamaguchi. Oda doesn't tend to write songs that make it into the manga. Instead, they're often quirky additions offered by those around him. Mostly gags, but Binks Sake is intentional. Oda sat down and he penned this for a reason. And something that's been very evident with Binks Sake from the beginning is that it's a song that is meant to connect the past to the present. In fact, when the song is first sung in its entirety at the end of Thriller Bark, it's used as a connection between the past and present as well. It continuously dips in and out of 50 years ago and modern day, and in a way that we've never seen before or since in One Piece. We see segments of Brook's tragedy with the Rumbar pirates, singing the song on the verge of death, and we frequently cut between that and the Straw Hats singing and dancing to the song in present day, victorious having just beaten Gecko Moria and emerged from the long night of Thriller Bark. And the lyrics of the song actually reflect Brook's personal journey, because the general story presented within Binks Sake is one of setting out to adventure, making a home for yourself on the sea, but then, oh no, problems happen, big problems, so big that we all end up as bones in the end, which is quite literal in Brook's case. But Binks Sake also ends quite ominously with a line about the moon rising a long night, and Brook proceeded to spend 50 years in the darkness of the Florian Triangle, with Luffy's arrival being his own personal dawn of the world. And much like Joy Boy, Brook also left a promise unfulfilled. In the same way that Joy Boy couldn't keep his promise to the Mermaid Princess, Brook couldn't keep his promise to Laboon. However, we're now in a modern day situation to write that. This goes beyond Brook though, so far beyond. Because I genuinely believe that Binks Sake is not only the tale of Joy Boy's life, but a very bittersweet one created after his departure from this world, a very peppy funeral dirge. And we're going to go through the song line by line because holy crap, with what we know now, this song is probably one of the biggest open spoilers in the series. But first, we need to address a little issue of translation. Binks Sake, or Binks's Brew as the song is known in English, is an incredibly different song to the original Japanese. And admittedly, the lyrics do sound quite nice in English, but that is very much the problem. When this was translated, the only focus was on creating a nice sounding song. And there was no way of knowing just how integral the literal Japanese meaning would be. And you can see this as early as the title Binks's Brew instead of Sake, which is problematic because Sake is incredibly important in One Piece, and it has been shown on multiple occasions to be the vehicle through which the bonds of friendship, respect, and even brotherhood are formed. So just by changing the title, you're already omitting the heart of the song. And there's some very interesting publication reasons behind this. The first 64 volumes of One Piece were translated across at least 9 different entities. And a big part of this is because there was a point in Viz history where they conducted a great speed up of the One Piece manga. They were trying to rapidly and desperately crank out like 20 volumes in a year so that they could catch up to the Japanese releases. Because One Piece was all of a sudden becoming very big in the West, and Viz were not ready for that explosion. And during this endeavor, Viz had to outsource the majority of their translations. For example, volume 50, where Binks Sake first appears, isn't even credited as being translated by a human being. It was a translation outsourced to a group called JN Productions. And what I'm trying to get at here is that this was a very different time to the Stephen Paul era, which is volume 65 onwards, where we now have a single consistent translator who has intimate knowledge of One Piece. That's not what this is at all. Back in this day, the translator was an outsourced contractor doing a gig and probably had minimal or even no knowledge of One Piece, and almost certainly translated Binks Sake with the goal in mind of just making it sound good in English. There was very little, if any, thought to the idea that this song could contain hidden meaning. For example, the second verse in the officially translated English starts with, "Bid farewell to Weaver's Town, say so long to Port Renown," which are good lyrics. They flow nicely together and they're very easy to sing. However, they bear almost no resemblance to what's actually being sung in Japanese, which is, "Farewell to the harbor, to my old hometown. Let's all sing out with a dawn as the ship sets sail." Definitely doesn't flow as well, but that dawn is a very important concept in One Piece. The dawn is made up of 2 katakana that Oda uses very frequently for particularly dramatic panels, indicating the sound of a drum, a don. And it's also part of the sound that forms the drums and indeed the heartbeat of liberation that was possessed by Joy Boy and now Luffy. With what we know now, the Don is a clear reference to Joy Boy and or the sun god Nika, but you won't see that in the official English, which is why we're not using the officially translated lyrics for this video. A better translation does exist on the Binks One Piece wiki page, but to be honest, even that one is quite lacking in some very key lines. And for said key lines in this video, I'm going to be referring to the more literal translation by Manu from the Ohara channel. He's done a lot of the heavy lifting here with all the language and the fact checking. He actually lives in Japan, so I trust him a lot more than me. He's made a video on this as well, which you can check out in the description below. But as a quick example of why he needed to go to this effort, the concept of singing is mentioned 3 times in the song. At the end of verse 1, the birds sing as they draw circles in the sky. Then in the middle of verse 2, let's all sing out with a dawn as the ship sets sail. And during the final verse, let's all sing it with a dawn, a song of waves. So I've looked at this song a lot over the years, but this is something that I didn't even notice until Manu pointed it out. And that's because in that final line, a song of the waves is not actually the most accurate translation. Instead, the lyric Unaba no Uta would be song of the deep sea. And with that clarification, I think a couple of you may have just had a oh my god moment, because now what we have is a song of the sky, a song of the deep sea, and a song of a ship sailing. Not at all unlike the 3 ancient weapons, one of which resides in the sky, another of which in the deep sea, and the other one, Pluton, is a ship that sails the seas. And if not an overt reference to the ancient weapons themselves, it is at the very least commentary on the primary societies that knew of Joy Boy and the sun god Nika. That is one example of the many revelations that this song contains. So let's look at this song line by line from the perspective that it is retelling the life of Joy Boy. Going to deliver Binks' sake, following the sea breeze, riding on the waves, far across the salty depths, the merry evening sun, the birds sing as they draw circles in the sky. So this first verse is Romance Dawn. Joy Boy is being called to adventure, and something very poignant is that most literally the Japanese translates as following the sea breeze, having the freedom to do what you want. So the idea is that Joy Boy, like Luffy, grew up on a dull and quiet or exciting but closed off island somewhere, which may or may not have been the ancient kingdom, and he heard the call to adventure, a call which came, quote, far across the salty depths and from the merry evening sun. And given that Joy Boy is heavily hinted to have possessed the same devil fruit as Luffy, this is the sheer freedom lust of the sun god Nika manifesting, and then when Joy Boy does set off, the birds sing as they draw circles in the sky. The sky rejoices that the sun has set out on its very bright adventure. Now in his video, Manu also suggests that this could be referencing Joy Boy activating the ancient weapon Uranus, because this is the part of the song that could be referring to that part of the trio. And it is powered by the Mother Flame, although Joy Boy's heartbeat has also been shown to power the ancient tech, and he leans into this quite heavily, maybe too heavily as the song goes on. I personally don't necessarily agree, but it could be. But more importantly, verse 2. Farewell to the harbor, to my old hometown. Let's all sing out with a dawn as the ship set sail. Waves of gold and silver dissolve to salty spray as we all set out to the ends of the sea. Again, this is Romance Dawn, and the dawn. That dawn is the drum of liberation setting sail. And according to Manu, the waves of gold and silver are more literally rather florid references to the light of the sun and the moon, 2 very key motifs in One Piece. And I here personally believe that these waves are referencing the emergence of a battle to be described later on in the song. You've got hints about both light and darkness sparkling about on the sea. Nothing major is happening yet, but events have been set in motion. And going with the ancient weapon theory, this verse also tells us of Joy Boy potentially awakening Pluton. Manu then has a bit of a complicated theory about how Joy Boy accidentally awakened these weapons and was himself responsible for the sea levels rising. And then he also comes to the conclusion that Joy Boy was Imu's brother. Gonna be honest, I don't quite follow him that far. And from here on out, both he and I have quite different interpretations of what the song means. But again, if you want to hear him out, there's a link to do so. But for now, verse 3. Going to deliver Binks' sake. We are pirates sailing through the sea. The waves are our pillows, the ship our roost. Flying the proud skull on our flags and our sails. So this verse is probably the peak of Joy Boy's life. It simply describes the sheer happiness of being free. And it does this through the metaphor of waves and ships representing a bed, aka a home. The whole world is his home. Maximum freedom. And it might sound a bit mundane, but this is just the calm before the storm referenced in the next verse. Now comes a storm through the far off sky. Now the waves are dancing, beat upon the drums. If you lose your nerve, this breath could be your last. But if you hold on, the morning sun will rise. Now the waves dancing is a bit mind-blowing because that has taken on a whole new and shockingly literal meaning recently, because we have quite literally seen waves dancing to the beat of drums in the manga recently. In chapter 1118 when Luffy and Bonnie activated their respective sun god forms, the beat of liberation was so strong that it affected the waves around them, resulting in this panel where it looks like both the ship and the waves are literally dancing as best they can, which is bizarrely understandable because even Dory and Rocky were hit with this overwhelming desire to dance in this extremely dire moment. So this verse may not be metaphorical at all, but problems are beginning. There's a large storm brewing in the far off sky, something that, we're gonna need to deal with. And right here is the make or break moment of the Void Century. After this verse, things take quite a tragic turn, just as history inevitably did. But within this verse, there is equal danger and equal hope. Yes, there's a huge storm brewing, but if we just hold on, the morning sun will rise. And they weren't necessarily wrong, but that sunrise would end up being about 800 years later than everyone would have liked. And this verse could in fact be referring to Luffy. We pass the song through the generations and emphasize that if we just hold on, the morning sun will eventually rise. But now, verse 4, going to deliver Binks' sake. Today and tomorrow, our dreams through the night. Waving our goodbyes, we'll never meet again. But don't look so down, for tomorrow, the night moon will also rise. And this verse is, it's quite depressing. It tells of a great loss. We're waving our goodbyes, never to meet again. At the very least, it's very bittersweet. And we may even have seen one of these goodbyes recently in chapter 1122, with Joy Boy leaving his hockey rope with Emmett, knowing that he would soon be gone. But this verse also states that the night and the moon will also rise, so this is the beginning of the long night of the world that we've been living in for the past 800 years. The 20 kingdoms have won, the vast majority of the planet has now sunk into the dark depths of the new ocean, and they are simply laying there dormant, waiting for the morning sun to rise, for the dawn of the world. But not all is lost because we do have one final verse. Going to deliver Binks' sake, let's sing it with a don, a song of the waves. Doesn't matter who you are, someday you'll just be bones. Never ending, ever wandering, our funny traveling tale. So that last part in particular is Warai Banashi, which can also be translated literally as laugh tale. Never ending, ever wandering, our laugh tale. And it's almost certainly the reason why Roger names the island he found Laugh Tale. It was after this song. But what really strikes me in this final verse is the declaration that let's all sing it with a don, which I believe could be referring to the song itself and its importance of being passed down with the will of Joy Boy or even the will of Nika. Sing it with a don, pass that drum beat down so that one day it can serve its purpose. And I do think that this song was created to pass down history, like what almost every real-world human society did prior to written history. The events of the past were transmitted through oral tradition, which, yes, it does sound like an STI, and you know what? It should, because these songs, these stories, these poems, they infected and embedded themselves in the minds of the next generation. And in this case, a song just so happens to be the one thing that the world government could not erase from history. Any written or physical record of these events outside of the poneglyphs could be dealt with, but they could not remove oral history. And so now this song has been passed down for 800 years, carrying both the tragedy and the hope of Joy Boy. But the song isn't necessarily a strictly linear history of Joy Boy. I think it definitely has a double meaning, both telling the story of what happened as well as the story of what now must happen. For example, with the aforementioned singing lines in the sky, the deep sea, and the ship at sea level, this could be describing each respective society mourning the loss of Joy Boy and or celebrating his legacy. Because eventually, Binks' sake describes the whole world singing. The song of the sky, the song of the deep sea, and the song of the surface. And even though it's incredibly tragic, it's not just about the loss of Joy Boy. It's also about the inevitability of mortality, the importance of enjoying the adventure while it lasts, and regardless of the outcome, leaving this world with a smile on your face and a don in your heart. And so there really could be no better song to pass through the generations. What is the deal with the monkey in the Monkey D. Luffy? Why has Oda used that name for several protagonists of several failed manga series before One Piece? And why is everyone who is named Monkey, or who literally is a monkey, in this series given a special power that no other character possesses? What is the monkey to this monk mystery? Well, to begin, a while ago, I stumbled upon a fantastic question on the internet which went as follows. How come everybody in One Piece is referred to by their last name? Symbolism. So if you're not familiar with Japanese culture, Luffy's name is probably quite a bombardment of bizarre. But in Japanese culture, the family name comes before the given name, which is why he's Monkey D. Luffy instead of Luffy D. Monkey. However, I do recognize that this gets a little bit confusing because certain anime or manga, not to name any names, but do use the English order, like say Uzumaki Naruto for example, instead of Naruto Uzumaki. Again, we're not naming names of any particular series, but that's how the English translation gets a bit inconsistent. Not that having Monkey as your family name somehow makes it make more sense, but this is a long-standing tradition of author Eiichiro Oda that well predates One Piece. Oda's monkey obsession dates at least all the way back to 1994, 3 years before the series that would become known as One Piece was published. This was one of Oda's many attempts to start a serialized manga in Weekly Shonen Jump, and it was called Forward. And it featured a protagonist named Monkey D. Pow, a woodcutter with 2 powers, which were to stretch and to fall asleep. Some other notable features about Monkey D. Pow include the pattern on his bandana, which would go on to be used as the pattern of the Gomu Gomu no Mi, as well as Pow's mentor, 5,008-year-old rubber tree spirit named Mary, as well as a thief named Liesel, one of approximately 20-something prototype Namis that Oda churned through before landing on Nami herself. That's not a joke, by the way. If you go through all of Oda's serialization attempts, and there are 20 plus of them, the vast majority of them contain a character who looks exactly like Nami. Nami has quite a rich heritage and wildly expansive family tree of characteristics that led to her creation, as do all of you. But even in 1994, Oda had a vision for a character named Monkey and insisted on carrying this name over many failed series until it finally stuck with One Piece. And to even begin to explain this obsession with monkeys, we need to note that Eiichiro Oda was heavily inspired by Akira Toriyama's Dragon Ball, which I personally find very funny because the infamous editor of Dragon Ball, Kazuhiko Torishima, has never liked One Piece and considered it, quote, trash from day one, adding another quote, manga that doesn't sell well is just trash for the editors to deal with. And to this day, he still takes shots at One Piece every now and then in public interviews. He's a very bitter man. But the greater point of this is to say that Monkey D. Luffy was, of course, partially inspired by Son Goku. And Son Goku is the Japanese translation of the Chinese name Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, and central figure of Journey to the West, an adventure designed to be both a humorous satire of Chinese bureaucracy as well as a source of spiritual insight. And in fact, Akira Toriyama was originally going to make Goku an actual monkey and go full Sun Wukong. And this is where it starts to become clear that the name Monkey isn't just something Oda thought would be, a bit of wacky fun, monkeys. Because the tale of a monkey wanting to become a king is a very familiar one. In fact, Sun Wukong became Monkey King through some very interesting means. He and the other monkeys in the place that they were in stated that whoever went through the waterfall and found the source of the stream, as well as returned to tell the tale, would be crowned as the gloriousome Monkey King, which Sun Wukong did, and that is more or less the entire premise of One Piece, as well as the mechanism by which one gets crowned Pirate King, just on a much larger scale. You need to be the first pirate to find the hidden island, as well as return, and then bam, congrats on your new Pirate King title, my lord. In addition to that premise, Luffy strongly parallels Sun Wukong himself. Both Sun Wukong and Luffy directly rebel against the heavens. In Luffy's case, he has been both literally and consistently thematically identified as the enemy of the gods of the One Piece world. Many, if not all of whom, are false gods, such as the world nobles, who themselves are an over-the-top satirical take of real-world bureaucracy, just like the gods of Journey to the West, but a bit more modernized and a bit more chunksome. Luffy and Sun Wukong are also both referred to as demons in their respective texts. In fact, in One Piece, anyone with the will of D is considered to be a demon by the world nobles and an enemy of the gods. Although I should note that there is some extremely important nuance that gets lost in translation. The brand of demon that Sun Wukong represents is known as a Yaoguai, which isn't a demon as we would understand them in the West. In English especially, the term demon is conflated with the concept of evil. It's very difficult to divorce evil from the idea of demons, but that's exactly what a Yaoguai is. You could more accurately describe them as monsters with special powers, sort of like what devil fruit users are in the One Piece world, yes? Not necessarily inherently good or evil, however they are usually portrayed in an antagonistic light. And to be fair, it's usually well deserved. Those Yaoguai made their a menace. And most devil fruit users in One Piece do mirror this and fall on the more villainous side of the spectrum. Again, just like the Yaoguai. And an example of this is this moment depicting the seduction of Tansanzang, an image that I love just because of how threateningly this hand looms over his crotch, waiting to strike those unassuming balls. And just in case this isn't apparent yet, the name Sun Wukong contains the word sun, and instead of being the Monkey King in One Piece, Luffy has inherited the powers of the sun god. The inspiration, it's pretty clear. What's less clear is what Oda has been doing with the concept of monkeys in One Piece in general, because this goes over a lot of people's heads, but whenever a monkey monkey appears, you should be paying very close attention. Surprisingly, they don't appear all that often. And when they do, Luffy, he has an innate affinity for monkeys, and again, there's good reason for this. This is something that gets a bit lost in the Viz translation, but for example, when Luffy first meets Masura, the ape-like human during the gyro arc, the very first thing that Luffy says is, "Hey, a monkey." To which Masura replies, "Huh? You think I'm hunky?" As if he misheard a compliment, and yeah, it's funny English word stuff, but what actually happened gets lost in translation. What Masura is actually saying can be translated more accurately as, "Huh? You think I'm monkeyful?" He says monkeyful, which is a bit of a tricky concept to explain. But basically, Masura is happy that someone is equating him so closely to a monkey, like telling someone that they're beautiful. The implication is that you think that their looks are like real good. And in this case, Masura thinks that his monkey likeness is really good. And don't worry if you don't quite get this conversation, because neither do Zoro or Sanji. And later on, they state that Luffy only really understood what was happening because, and I quote, "they're both monkeys." And the same thing happens with another member of the Saruyama Alliance. Saruyama literally meaning Monkey Mountain, by the way, which is another possible reference to Sun Wukong, as after rebelling against the heavens, Wukong spent 500 years imprisoned under a mountain, a monkey mountain. But as soon as Masura and Shoujo, the orangutan-like man, meet Luffy and they're all in one location, all three of them instantly click and start getting along. And again, the reason for this is cited as being because all three of them are monkeys. And the very touching thing about Masura and Shoujo in particular is that, as wacky as they are, Mont Blanc Cricket credits them as being the fools who saved him from the loneliness of diving in the cold dark seas. Essentially, they gave Mont Blanc Cricket his own personal Dawn of the World. That is the power of even the most average of monkey in the One Piece world. And most of them are far from average. Monkeys carry very high status in One Piece, and that's not just evident in Luffy. And more often than not, they all share the notion of being extremely close to the gods of the world. Luffy's grandfather, Monkey D. Garp, is a prime example of this. The legendary hero of the Marines who, despite serving the world government, consistently finds ways of avoiding serving the world nobles directly. Sort of like how Sun Wukong was invited into heaven, but then didn't obey anyone and was a bit of a prick. Then you've got prickery on a new level with Luffy's father, Monkey D. Dragon, who, in a much more Wukong-inspired story, is directly conjuring a revolution to overthrow the gods. And outside of Luffy's family, you even have Commander-in-Chief Kong, the highest-ranking human official within the world government who is allowed to live on Marijois, but with the knowledge that he is the lowest-ranking being to do so. Again, much like how Wukong was invited to live in heaven, but under the condition that he took care of all of the heavenly steeds, effectively making him a glorified stable boy. And if you look at the more literal monkeys elsewhere in the One Piece world, you find the Humandrils, the insanely powerful natives of Mihawk's Island, or even Monster, who is one of the senior officers of the Red Hair Pirates. Monkeys in One Piece are funny, but they're no joke. Oda doesn't just sprinkle them in as randomly as every other animal. There's a certain reverence to monkeys, and even the lowest ones still carry a hint of Wukong flair. As an example, during the initial Sabaody arc, there's even a team of kidnappers called the Coffee Monkeys, and their leader's design is based on Sun Wukong, which you can tell by the gold headband and the staff, and all of the crew seem to have functioning tails, potentially implying the existence of a monkey man race within the One Piece world. Potentially related to minks, because minks have a fair few monkeys, but these guys, the Coffee Monkeys, are distinctly unminkly. But the thing about Sun Wukong is that while you can see some clear inspiration in parts of his story for Luffy, in terms of his character, they do vary quite radically. Sun Wukong is quite arrogant and even barbaric, with little to no sense of humility, even once going so far as to urinate on Buddha's hand. To be fair, I don't think he knew it was Buddha at the time. Rather like a pillar at the end of the universe, it turned out to be Buddha's hand, you know, in that classic situation. Still, it's not particularly Luffy-like, and there are two explanations for this. The first is that during Sun Wukong's journey, he encounters a singing woodcutter, which I believe is the inspiration for the aforementioned Monkey D. Pao, who himself was a woodcutter, with Oda potentially lifting aspects from both characters and combining them into one. The determination and power of Sun Wukong with the joyous simplicity of the woodcutter. But the second and more mind-blowing explanation comes from chapter 1049. This is the climactic end of the fight battle between Luffy and Kaido, where Luffy uses a new attack called Bajrang Gun, which is a direct reference to Bajrang Bali, also known as Hanuman, a monkey deity of the Hindu pantheon. And Hanuman has a lot more in common with Luffy than Sun Wukong does. For a start, Hanuman's celestial father was Vayu, god of the wind, something that is pretty profoundly reflected in Luffy's father, Dragon, who has been strongly hinted at having a wind ability or wind affinity ever since the early days of Logtown. Furthermore, Hanuman's guru was Surya, the sun god. And then there's this. Hanuman was a very mischievous little child thing, and one morning he woke up feeling extremely hungry, and seeing a big juicy fruit presented in front of him, Hanuman decided to grab it and eat it. However, what Hanuman was trying to grab and eat was in fact the sun, which he had mistaken for basic nourishment. Now this is shockingly similar to how Luffy ate his devil fruit. He was also a very mischievous little child thing, always hungry, and would eat anything that even remotely resembled food, including a devil fruit, an object that traditionally neither looks and especially does not taste appealing. But Luffy's hunger blinded him to both of these, and so he accidentally ate an entire sun god fruit. They both tried to eat fruit that turned out to be a sun. And if Oda had this sun god idea from the beginning, then there is no way that he was unaware of Hanuman. And it should be said that Hanuman was obviously unsuccessful in consuming the sun, because just look outside, it's very nice and bright, unless it's night. But I can't help but wonder if Luffy is Oda's Hanuman fanfic, enacting the situation of, yeah, but what if he did eat the sun? But what else does Luffy have in common with Hanuman? Well, according to scripts, Hanuman was also given the ability to grow bigger or shrink smaller in size, both of which Luffy has now displayed for himself, considering that he can become a giant at will with Gear 5th, and he used to be able to shrink as a result of the after effects of Gear 3rd. What's more interesting is that after playing a prank on an old man praying, a curse was cast on Hanuman, which made him forget all of his powers, effectively meaning that he lost all of the abilities granted to him by the gods. And while Luffy didn't forget, he was definitely unaware of his true capabilities until very recently. Worship of Hanuman is also often sought by those attempting to overcome challenges of illness and poverty. Illness in particular being something that Luffy fights against a lot, because a lot of the nations he finds himself fighting on behalf of are said to be sick. This is a trend that started on Drum Island with Dr. Hirula claiming that Drum was ill, and he was on a quest to cure the hearts of the people, which Luffy ultimately assisted in, and that cycle of country sickness tends to rinse and repeat a lot in One Piece. And then there's poverty. Luffy does that a lot as well. And as for an example of poverty, that is what Wano was all about. Yes, Luffy was fighting because he promised Momonosuke that he would help him, but Luffy's primary driving force was the very first person he met on the island, Tama. He saw her situation of poverty and starvation and made a vow that he would defeat Kaido so that she would be able to eat as much as she wants whenever she wants. But perhaps more importantly, Hanuman is described as quite pure, naive, and innocent, selfless and devoted. And so Luffy is kind of like a combination of Hanuman and Sun Wukong, a greatest hits of the monkey deities, because he has this intriguing mixture of both selflessness and personal desire, which is quite hard to describe. But the name Monkey, it's not just a random choice by Oda, because this name encapsulates the legacy of two cultures, taking aspects of both and creating a brand new monkey-based mythological figure for the global pantheon in the form of the sun god Nika. The name Nika being taken from the Japanese onomatopoeia for grinning or smiling. So that's the monkey part covered, but now we should ask a much more curious question. What does Luffy mean? Aloof without the Y is actually a nautical term, referring to the edge of a fore and aft sail next to the mast or stay. And look, I'm not going to pretend to know what any of those words mean, and neither is Eiichiro Oda. It was assumed for a very long time that this was an intentional choice, given the series' focus on sailing, as well as other names matching that theme like Nami, which is Japanese for wave. However, in One Piece 10th Treasures, Oda revealed that this was purely a coincidence, but one that he was delighted by. Oda has simply claimed that he named Luffy Luffy because it felt right for the main character. But with all due respect, fictional pirate author man, I do not believe you. Given how thoroughly he has thought about the monkey and even the D, mate, Oda loves the D, I would bet that Oda's put a lot of thought into the name Luffy as well. However, if he was to tell us right now, then it would likely be a spoiler for events to come. How big is the One Piece world? The short answer is very, but the longer and more satisfying answer is the rest of this video. I always assumed that the One Piece world was bigger than Earth, maybe 2 or 3 times at most, but mate, I was wrong, and it took the words of a Birdman to trigger today's journey when he stated that within the One Piece world, there are potentially 10 to 20 million islands. And that got me thinking. My thought was, it's quite a few, which was very shocking because looking at this world thing, and it doesn't seem that big. I mean, it's not even as big as I am, and I am far from some sort of Galactus. But if this planet has around 10 to 20 times as many islands as our real world planet thing, does that mean that the One Piece world is 10 to 20 times bigger than Earth? Because that might actually explain a few things, like how sea kings exist, colossal creatures that are on average 5 kilometers long, or how a 35-kilometer tall elephant can be classified as a phantom island somehow remaining hidden, or the rather startling reality that this umbrella at the entrance of Onigashima is taller than the Burj Khalifa. So here's the scary thing. The idea of the One Piece planet being 10 to 20 times the size of Earth is an understatement. I can prove it with fictional facts. Because series author Eiichiro Oda does not shy away from giving oddly specific measurements of his world, and for a taste of some hot throbbing scale, we are going to stop by the desert nation of Alabasta, an island with a population of 10 million people, which is around the population of the United Arab Emirates, as well as many other countries, but I chose the UAE for fun thematic desert-related reasons. Whilst the Straw Hats were on the island to punch a crocodile, in order to get to the capital city Alabana, Vivi and the Straw Hats had to cross the Sandora River, which Vivi stated was 30 miles wide. Not 30 miles long, 30 miles wide. Or around 50 kilometers for those of us who use sensible measurements. And at the climax of the arc, we get this exceptionally beautiful bird's eye shot of Alabasta. It's a shot from the perspective of the raindrops about to gracefully fall onto the capital city, and when you see the whole country, it really puts into perspective how those tiny quirky mini-maps we saw showed us almost nothing of Alabasta and that we'd barely explored the nation despite how much time we'd spent there. But the most shocking thing is seeing the Sandora River in relation to the rest of the country, because it looks like a crack in a wall. However, using the width of said crack, we can now measure the actual size of Alabasta, which was done by Sin Cameron 20, who created a red line and then a blue line, and then ascertained that Alabasta is 3,180 kilometers long, and that this blue line clocks in at 3,980 kilometers wide. That is almost 4,000. And that's very relevant to me because, as it turns out, Alabasta is shockingly close to being almost the exact same size as Australia, because the distance of Australia from east to west coast is 4,030 kilometers. And to put that into terms that 44.9% of my audience will understand, that's only about 500 kilometers less than the distance from east to west coast of the United States, and if you were to put two Alabastas side by side, you'd only be 1,000 kilometers shy of the east to west distance of Russia, aka by far the biggest of the countries on the earth. And in One Piece, it only takes 2 and a bit of these 10 to 20 million islands to equal that. Now let's be fair, Alabasta is one of the larger Grand Line islands, many of which are minuscule in comparison. And in fact, later on in this video, we are going to calculate the size of the average Grand Line island, which is going to be mind-blowing. But at this stage, we do need to ask the question of, is Alabasta's scale an aberration and perhaps a case of Eiichiro Oda putting numbers on pages with no real concept of what they actually imply? That is entirely possible. One Piece is not a series well known for its consistent scaling, such as my personal favorite image of all time of Zoro and Kozuki Oden side by side, because these two somehow used the same sword, a sword which should be taller than Zoro according to Oda's sizing. But it isn't because something fictional pirate story. So maybe Alabasta is the same situation. To know for sure, we'd need to check the other islands to see if there's any sort of consistency. And so our go-to is Alabasta 2.0, Dressrosa, located in the New World. And the most important resident of Dressrosa that I'd like to introduce you to is Viola, because she has one of the most overpowered devil fruits in the series called the Giro Giro Numi, aka the Glare Glare fruit, which gives her access to X-ray vision, mind reading, and molten whale tears. But very importantly, for the sake of this video, there is a fourth ability. Viola has a technique called Senrigan, meaning clairvoyance and translated as the all-seeing eye. This allows Viola to see everything that's happening within a 4,000 kilometer radius, and she claims that she can see literally everything happening anywhere on the island. And the position where she was located at the time of the statement was the north coast of the island near Green Bit, meaning that for Viola to see the entire nation, Dressrosa must be at least 4,000 kilometers both long and wide, because it's an almost perfectly circular nation. So basically, Dressrosa is another Australia. So much for it being Spain. Hola, mates. But do you know what country you don't expect to be Australia? Well, that would be Japan. Japan kind of has its own thing going on, except in One Piece, where the distance of the nation of Wano is given. Although, scandalously, it never got translated into English. Whilst Odin is boiling in the pot of oil during the legendary hour, arrow letters are fired all across the country, informing people of why Odin had been acting like a fool for the past 5 years. Now, in the English translation, this says, "The letter arrows of Wano cross great distances to send messages," which is not what the original Japanese says. In Japanese, it's stated that the arrow letters crossed a distance greater than sen-ri. Sen meaning 1,000, so the arrows crossed 1,000 ri. But what is this ri, you ask? A ri is a traditional Chinese unit of distance that was also adopted by Japan, with a single ri in Japan being approximately 3.93 kilometers. And just as a side note, Viola's all-seeing eye, the Senrigan, contains the same wording. Senrigan, senri, 1,000 ris. And guess what happens happens when you put 1,000 Ries together. That adds up to 3,930 kilometers, meaning that Wano is the size of another Australia. That's 3 Australias now. In fact, it's very potentially even larger because it depends entirely on where the arrow letters were sent from. Because if they were sent from the flower capital in the sort of center, then Wano could be twice as big as Australia and starting to encroach on Russia scales of landmass. But I take it you've started to notice the One Piece trend now, being that all major arc islands tend to be around 4,000 kilometers wide and anywhere between 3,000 to 4,000 kilometers long at the very least. And the reason for this is quite simple. It's because whenever Oda designs a space, it would seem that he starts with a blank template of 1,000 Ri, because it's a nice round number with a lot of cultural meaning, as well as using a measurement of the past to tell this great fantasy epic. The bigger point being that Oda wasn't just high and not thinking when he stated the alabaster distances, he was actually being very precise, and that size was as intentional 20 years ago as it is now. In fact, he's remained consistent to a fault with this 4,000 kilometer system. To look at things on a smaller yet still ridiculously massive scale, the ninja pirate Mink Samurai Alliance sailing into Onigashima is one of the most trippy panels in the entire series because there's a lot of mundane looking objects like swords and umbrellas. However, and you may genuinely miss this, but if you look all the way the crap down here, you'll see a tiny blob that is the Thousand Sunny, which according to the Viviacard data book is 56 meters tall, meaning that this umbrella is taller than the Burj Khalifa, which currently holds the real-life record of being the world's tallest building. In the One Piece world, the Burj Khalifa is just set dressing for an infinitely more colossal building. And they also want to put this into perspective with concepts such as the ancient weapons. Pluton, Uranus, and Poseidon are all said to be capable of destroying islands. In the case of Uranus, we've even seen it happen. But according to Oda's consistent scaling, these weapons have destructive power that most of us haven't even come close to comprehending, because one shot from these could theoretically destroy the United States of America. I chose America instead of Australia this time because I live in Australia and thus don't want to be destroyed. But now that we know that alabaster wasn't an aberration and that Oda actually has a surprisingly strict sizing system, we can use this to calculate the size of the Grand Line and the One Piece planet itself. And I want to preface this by saying that even though things are very consistent, I don't think that Oda planned for the planet to be quite as big as it apparently is. Size and scale in One Piece has a lot more to do with the quest to continue to keep Luffy looking small, to keep him in the status of underdog, despite the fact that he is continually snowballing in terms of both power and influence. So as Luffy discovers more and more, as he gains more and more power, the world around him gets bigger and bigger, to keep Luffy looking like that same boy in a barrel who we first met during Romance Dawn. For a micro example, there's a trend of each villain Luffy going up against getting bigger. Doflamingo, for example, is twice Luffy's height, and doing this makes Doflamingo look like a looming, insurmountable challenge to Luffy. But then, after defeating Doflamingo, Luffy needed a greater challenge, which brought us to Charlotte Katakuri, who is approximately 3 Luffy's tall, and after Luffy beat Katakuri, guess what the next step is? We need a bigger challenge, which was delivered through Kaido, who is 4 Luffy's tall. In his base form anyway, we don't count the dragon form. And this is leading us quite nicely into our upcoming Elbaf saga, the Island of Giants, where if Luffy does have a new opponent, you'd best believe that he'll be likely 5 or even 6 Luffy's tall. But let's get to the crazy stuff. Here is the size of the One Piece planet. Going back to this bird's eye shot of Alabasta, knowing that the length of the nation is 3,180 kilometers, we can then extrapolate that the total length in this image is somewhere around the region of 73,000 kilometers, which is almost twice the circumference of the planet Earth. So you could fit every country on Earth and all of its water surface in this panel twice over. And what we're going to do from here is we're going to be as conservative as we possibly can. And we're going to say that the upper and lower barriers of this panel represents the full height of the Grand Line. And if you went any higher or any lower, you'd end up in the Calm Belt. That's what we're going with, but this is where things get a tiny bit tricky, because unfortunately for us, there is no official map of the One Piece world. In fact, that's kind of Nami's whole dream, to be the first person to properly map the world. And unfortunately, what that means is that every time a new map has been shown to us in the anime and the manga, the scale is pretty wildly out of proportion with every other time it's appeared. However, there is a map drawn by the author Eiichiro Oda which was never intended for release. However, it did eventually see the light of day, and this served as his own personal guide for the world, which was later digitized and released as part of Rurubu One Piece, which is a travel guide for the One Piece world, and so it includes the updated version of Oda's original map. Updated because a lot of stuff changed, like island placement and names, etc., but not the overall construction. And so for this next section, I have to give full credit to Diabolus414 on the One Piece power scaling Reddit, who spent God knows how long breaking this map down according to the canon measurements that we've already gone over, and it has resulted in the following not so surprising revelations. The distance of Skypiea clocks in at 4,176 kilometers, the Empire of Totaland is 4,350, and even Drum Island comes ridiculously close to the Oda standard, being 3,828 kilometers. So that's 3 more Australias to add to the tally. And again, this doesn't surprise me. At this point, I'm convinced that when designing a new island, Oda uses a standard 1000 re-template. But our absolute mad lad Redditor even went through and calculated the size of the average Grand Line Island, because most of them, as stated before, are much smaller than our main stops, and that average was 2,349 kilometers from coast to coast. So if we were going to take Marco's word seriously, and there's no reason why we shouldn't, then we have a world with somewhere between 10 to 20 million islands, the average size of which is somewhere around as big as Greenland. Meanwhile, the entire length of the Grand Line and the New World, including both intersections of the Red Line, which is the circumference of the One Piece planet, is just shy of 1 million kilometers, which is more than twice the circumference of Jupiter, the biggest of boys in our solar system, not including the sun, of course, which has a circumference of 4 times the One Piece planet. But look, it's still pretty damn wild that we are looking at a quarter of a sun here. So to conclude the inquiry of how big the One Piece world is, I think you'll all agree that the best answer is very. Monkey D. Luffy is from the sky, as is Monkey D. Dragon, as is Monkey D. Garp, and Oda has been painfully obviously drawing the connections between the Shandian tribe and the monkey family since as early as East Blue. Skypiea is an arc that only continues to appreciate over time, but even the most ardent of Skypiea appreciators could not have predicted this gem that has been stumbled upon. This video was inspired by Randy Troy's examination of Luffy's lineage. He connected a lot of the dots that I reference and expand on, and a link to his video will be in the description for your viewing curiosities. But look, I was skeptical at first, but there's an increasing avalanche of evidence that points to Luffy being a descendant of the Shandian tribe. And again, it's not just Luffy. In fact, every known member of the monkey family has a distinct connection, or even connections plural to the Shandia tribe. So let's go as far back as we can to the oldest of known monkey men, Mr. Monkey D. Garp, and specifically his funky dog hat. This headwear is, to say the very least, evocative of the head garbs reserved for the chiefs of the Shandian tribe. In both the modern day and in the flashback 400 years ago, the respective chief at the time had their heads nestled within the mouth of a beast of their choosing. Every new chief appears to select a different animal, but the style of the headwear is always the same. So sure, it could be an aesthetic coincidence, but it could be more, much more. Just like Garp's balls. In particular, the colossal ball and chain he used to assault the Thousand Sunny at the end of the Water 7 saga, which is the exact same weapon that the warrior Calgara used 400 years ago, albeit his was on a much smaller scale. So this is an interesting set of scenarios. With the headwear, Garp was the one first shown wearing it. So that could have been a situation where Oda designed Garp and without any thought then later decided, hey, that'd be a cool idea to use for these here Shandian chiefs. But with the weapon, Oda introduced Calgara first and then gave it to Garp later on. So what we have here is Garp being caught in a narrative spit roast, flanked at both ends by references to the Shandia tribe. He and Calgara are both legendary heroes as well, but I'm not going to count that because, being a legendary warrior, it's pretty vague criteria in this world thoroughly packed full of legendary warriors. So let's move down the sperm count to Monkey D. Dragon, a man with a tattoo that has been frequently compared to Wiper's tribal face tattoo by fans. This is, by itself, pretty flimsy evidence, because the tattoos themselves look nothing alike. The only thing they have in common is being on the left side of the face. And you know what? They could be connected, as in perhaps a marking on this side of the face signifies leadership in times of great struggle, with Wiper adopting it for the 400-year war with the Skypians, and Dragon donning it to lead the revolution against the 900-year war against the world government. It's definitely possible, but there is a connection that I like much more better, which is Dragon's voice actor, Hidekatsu Shibata. Quite the iconic, currently 87-year-old man who only voices one other character in all of the One Piece, and that character just so happens to be the warrior Calgara. And Toei does have a bit of a habit of choosing the same voice actor for family lines. Nico Robin and Nico Olvia are both voiced by Yuriko Yamaguchi, for example. And hey, maybe the producers just thought that this very old man was the right old man for both of these jobs. But I personally find it very intriguing that Dragon and Calgara have perhaps been fatesomely connected here. And someone else I should bring up is Yuki Minaguchi, who voices Calgara's daughter Moose, which is such a small role that it doesn't even appear on her Wikipedia page, but you know what other role does pop up? Well, that would be her only other voice in One Piece, Portgas D. Rouge, which isn't, a direct direct connection to Luffy, but Rouge did own the womb that produced Luffy's brother, so that feels pretty damn connected to me. And as for the man in question, Luffy has the most direct link to the Shandia tribe via the cover of volume 27, where Oda pulls a Red Bull and gives Luffy wings, in addition to a very cheeky wink. It's the kind of wink that says, oh, why does Luffy have wings here? Well, that's a secret, or is it? Wink. This volume cover is quite possibly the most overanalyzed in the One Piece fandom, and for good reason, because this wink is very, very odd. I cannot emphasize this enough. Luffy never winks. I'm not sure if he's physically capable, at least not in the manga. The only other example I can find of him winking was in One Piece Film Z after chugging a bottle of some sweet, sweet milk. But that's not canon. And there is a confirmed deeper meaning to this wink. It's done on purpose to replicate the full island of Jaya, which becomes a skull with the missing left eye. So Luffy is winking to represent that missing eye, and Luffy's open right eye represents the location of the golden city of Shandora. Plus, if Luffy existed in the real world, Oda said that he would be from Brazil. I don't know why I said it like that. And the Shandian culture and aesthetic seems to take heavy inspiration from Aztec and Mayan culture. There's even one point where you can flat out see Oda redrawing Quetzalcoatl. Now, to be completely fair before you all, actually me in the comments. The Aztec, Maya, and even Incan empires never extended to Brazil, to the best of my not very much knowledge. And here's where it's tempting to say that Oda does extensive research, and if he meant for Luffy to be part of Mexico-inspired culture, then Oda would have simply made him Mexican. And to which I say, he did. Oda did have final approval over casting Mexican actor Iñaki Godoy, so I do still think we're very much in business here. Plus look, Mexico, Brazil, colossal differences in every conceivable way. However, to man in Japan, those differences are much less. You look at them on a map, ideally a world map, not a One Piece world map, and you go, same region of the world, good enough. And it's at this point that I really stop believing that all of this is a coincidence. The monkey family, whether by fate or by design, have been repeatedly connected to the Shandian tribe, very much indicating that they could be their descendants. But there's a question that you're probably all asking right now. It's a very simple one-word question, which is wings? Question mark. Where are they, Internet man? Well, not all sky people have wings. In fact, the most iconic sky being of all, Enel, certainly did not. And while he wasn't native to Skypiea, he was a Birkin, another tribe of sky people whose island he blew it up. He completely destroyed it. It was a real dick move. But in any case, Enel should have wings, but he does not. And while the reason for this has never been revealed, the popular speculation is that he removed them in order to install his 4-piece drum kit. And you know, that's a fairly easy explanation, but Enel is not the only one. The next most famous Skyman is Garnfall, and this slips past 99.9% of people, but he doesn't have wings either. It's generally assumed by fans that yes, he does have wings, but they're being covered up by his suit of armor. However, in the second From the Decks of the World cover story, we finally see Garnfall without armor or a cloak, and he's just rocking a casual t-shirt. There are no wings to be found at all. And look, if you've just detected a bit of a bizarre odor, that's because this is starting to smell like a trend. Because in the Nolan flashback, which I guess at this point is more like the Kalgara flashback, when Shandora is shot up into the sky, we meet a third man without wings, and this is the unnamed god of Skypiea who ruled 400 years ago. So that's this many sky people without wings. And all three of them refer to themselves as God. So I'm just gonna say that a man, said to be a sun god not having wings does kinda make sense with this trend. And there are a couple of explanations for this non-wingedness. One is that Enel, Garnfall, and Old Smoking God all took on the title of God, and part of that responsibility may traditionally involve removing your wings. Because remember that everything's kind of backwards up at Skypiea. We see wings as a sign of ascension, angelic beings far beyond us. However, they see wings as everyday existence. Wings are the feature of the common man, and not at all befitting the god. I guess the idea being that a god should be able to fly without mortal wings, something like that. I don't know. I just know that this is clearly a purposeful decision made by Oda. Whatever the answer is, it's just part of sky culture that God has no wings. Whether that involves slicing them off upon ascension, or I guess descension, although the other option is a bit less brutal and that it's simply a genetic trait, that the wings are a dominant gene, but every now and then a recessive wingless child is born, and as a result of that, the child is then groomed, but not in a bad way, in a good way, there is good grooming, to become a future god. Because somewhere along the way, the culture of the sky citizens has dictated that children born without wings are extra holy and godsome. And just think about what would happen to us in the opposite situation. If a child was born with pristine white wings, then they'd receive an organized religious cult formed around them quicker than their first drop of delicious breast milk, or even delicious regular milk, or even literally delicious anything that wasn't a cult. That is the sheer speed at which this child would be deified. deified. And that's also probably one of the only ways that someone like Garnfall could become a god. Because remember, he didn't even have the ability to use mantra, aka observation haki, so other than a polka-dotted Pegasus, he didn't bring a whole lot to the table. And pumpkins, so many pumpkins. But let's get back to Luffy, and the fact that we may have already seen his ancestors in the manga. I've been thinking about this idea a lot lately, perhaps too much, but repetition does not negate relevance. Oda had no idea how long One Piece was going to run for. Originally, it was a 5-year plan. We all know the deal. But Oda used that plan to wipe his butt after incurring uncontrollable adventure diarrhea. Oda was struck with the "I can't stop having so much fun drawing my fictional pirate comic" disease. But not predicting that it would run for close to 3 decades, he set up everything he needed to end the story by the time that Skypiea was complete. All of the necessary pieces are there, and they have been there for a very long time. And then the rest is all about how much fun we can have on this adventure before putting them together. That's the theory I subscribe to, which is why the endgame of One Piece is all of a sudden a very nostalgic affair. All of a sudden, characters, themes, and locations from specifically Alabasta and the Skypiea sagas are front and center again because they were always planned to be the integral elements to end this story. And so Oda may very well have provided us with Luffy's historical origins. And I now present to you a boy named Setto, the first Shandian we saw contract tree fever, to which he tried to really brutally scrape off with a rock, which is very owl looking. And I have seen this brought up over the years, but I've never taken it particularly seriously until now. But Setto looks exactly like Luffy in every way except for, the fashionable aesthetic elements that we can control. Observe, if we gave Setto a makeover, gave him a Luffy haircut, a stylish scar accessory under his right eye, and just plonk a straw hat on him, then what we have is just Luffy. This is relevant because Luffy has a very unique design in the One Piece world. He might seem simple, but no one has his face. No one except for this guy. And while they do start out being extremely different, as time goes on, Setto develops a series of very Luffy-like traits. My favorite of which is when the Shandian tribe make a move to execute Nolan's men early, and Setto just plonks himself in front of their cage and gives them the old Luffy serious stare down. The kind that tells you he's made up his simple mind, and you're gonna get hurt real bad if you take even a single step forward. Not that Setto could have really backed this up like Luffy can, but what's important is that the aura is definitely there. And then you know what happens? Setto goes on to marry a woman! Gasp. A woman named Moose, who we've already brought up in this video. She's the daughter of Kalgara and the elected sacrifice to put a stop to the tree fever, claiming the lives of the Shandians. And to her credit, Moose wasn't hugely upset with this role. In fact, she was happy that she was going to meet the Sun God, which is the very first mention of the Sun God in the series. And overall, this is very will of D of Moose, to go to one's death with a smile. And speaking of D, Setto's name in Japanese is also how they would pronounce the Egyptian god Set, aka the god of storms, which is what the will of D is very much known for causing. So the theory from here is that these two conducted intercourse, which resulted in spawn. However, their child did not accompany them to the sky. And Randy Troy's idea here is that Setto and Moose's child was in the half of the house that remained on what would become known as Jaya. And whether it's that specific or not, it is possible and even likely that some tribe members were on the other half of the island when the knock-up stream activated. In fact, we don't even know for sure if Setto and Moose were shot up. In the manga, the only recognizable face we see in the sky is Kalgara. So the whole family could have remained on the blue sea, or just the child. Either way, it works. In fact, the latter works even better because this could also explain where the D came from. Because sure, the Shandians do seem to have a solid connection to the ancient kingdom and likely the will of D as well. However, we don't know anyone within that tribe, past or present, who openly carried a D. So if the baby is left on the blue sea, then someone bearing a D lands on the island, finds the child and decides to raise them. All of a sudden we have another D, and fate intervening as it always does. As well as going on to set up inherited will. Kalgara's reason for wanting to take back his homeland and ringing the bell was friendship. He wanted to continue ringing that bell to make sure that Noland heard, but he died in battle without being able to ring it again even a single time. And if Luffy is the descendant of Kalgara, then 400 years later he would go on to meet Noland's descendant, Mont Blanc Cricket, and together they would complete the will of their respective ancestors. Cricket by helping Luffy get to Skypiea, and Luffy ringing the bell for him and solving the generation-spanning question of Cricket's heritage. But it's also much more than that, because the original reason why the Shandians had a ritual of ringing the golden bell was to guide the souls of their ancestors back to their homeland. And thinking about it that way, what Luffy did was ring the golden bell not just for Cricket's sake, but also to potentially guide Noland's soul back to Shandora, something that he may have been searching for the past 400 years after death. That sort of thing isn't out of the question in One Piece, a series where the human soul is confirmed come to exist, as well as the concept of an afterlife, and even the idea of souls lingering in the human world. But also remember that those with the will of D are the enemies of the gods. Primarily false gods, like those nasty world nobles, or they're slightly less nasty but still bad and ill. And both Noland and Kalgara also fall into this category of being enemies of the gods, as they both took a stand against those with the title of god. Noland kills Kashigami, the big old snake that the Shandians worshipped, and Kalgara eventually doubled down on this by killing Kashigami's child, both of which were worshipped as gods. And not only that, but Kalgara does so standing incredibly victoriously against a beautiful sunset, which might just be some lovely atmospheric framing, but given that we know for a fact that Oda already had the sun god idea in mind, given that the sun god was first mentioned a couple of chapters prior to this, and that he would go on to draw Luffy in the Nika position a handful of chapters after this one, I would argue that sticking Kalgara in front of the sun is very intentional. Something that we should also note is that the golden bell itself, it has a name. It's called the Light of Shandora. Nothing, mind-blowing, but yet another persistent reference to the light and the dawn and the sun and all of that. But this would make it all the more meaningful when Wiper pleads with Luffy to ring the Light of Shandora, to essentially complete this branch of his inherited will and ring the bell for his ancestor, with Luffy and Wiper actually being incredibly distant relatives. Wiper was hell-bent on being the one to complete Kalgara's will, but it would also make sense if he allowed another descendant of Kalgara to do so as well. And then there's this. During the climax of the Skypiea arc, the Shandian tribe elder remained in the village and stood praying in front of the statue of Kalgara, pleading with his spirit to protect everyone, a prayer which would go on to be answered by Luffy. The elder made a plea to Kalgara, and Luffy answered, not with the drums of liberation as he would go on to use in the future, but on this occasion with the Bell of Friendship, a prophecy that was inscribed on the accompanying poneglyph. We are the ones who weave history with the reverberations of the Great Bell. This is why Oda will never reveal Nami's true history, despite the fact that he is well aware of it and was at one point ready and willing to implement it before taking his finger off the story trigger at the very last second and deciding to leave Nami's extended story untold. However, in the process, he did kind of semi-tell it, and from what we know, Nami actually has one of the more tragic backstories in One Piece. And when I say that, I mean even more tragic than what we saw with Bellmare and Arlong. For decades now, Ichiro Oda has been smouging it up. He has been sitting on a big story treasure that he refuses to reveal to us. And all we currently know is that Nami was found as a baby within the then recently ravaged and destroyed Oikot Kingdom in East Blue. Oikot, by the way, is Tokyo backwards, so it was likely a kingdom of some prominence to be named after Japan's capital city. Or at least that's what I originally thought, foolishly so. Apparently in Japanese, Oikot is a term used to mean not Tokyo, and it often illustrates a lifestyle completely the opposite of Tokyo, one with more rural charms, less expensive and less stressful than living in the city. So with that in mind, Oikot was probably just another one of those peaceful-ish areas of East Blue. It's never really been expanded upon beyond that for reasons that we'll get to. But interestingly, in the One Piece live action series, we actually have a blink and you'll miss it shot of Nami looking at a map of the Oikot Kingdom with some notable figures on the left, perhaps royalty, perhaps Nami relatives, perhaps both of the things it is I just said. And the island itself seems to be in the shape of a big sea serpent monster, which is pretty cool. But baby Nami was found by Child Nojiko, and the two of them were found by Bellmare, with the three of them going on to form a found family. But what we never learned is who Nami's biological parents were. And usually I'd shrug that off as not important in this particular series. Who cares? It's about found family. But on this occasion, there are two things. One is that, as stated, Oda does know this information and he was once planning on revealing it. And secondly, whether it's relevant to them or not, the vast majority, if not every Straw Hat, does seem to have notable biological or inherited lineage. For example, Zoro is the descendant of Ryuma, Usopp is potentially the descendant of Noland, and if not, still the son of Yasop. That's pretty good. Sanji is the prince of a prominent kingdom. Robin is the last survivor of a civilization who could read the ancient language, and to get into the sheer nepotistic mess that is Monkey D. Luffy would take up the rest of this video. All of this is to say that this crew, they were not a series of people who met by chance. Each and every one of them was fated to be brought together, because they all have their own special contribution to make to the dawn of the world, and also to fulfill that legacy of the past. And Nami, of course, has an innate special ability to navigate the most dangerous weather conditions on the planet, part of which was honed during her time with Arlong, as she had to quite literally sink or swim as a child to gather enough money to buy her village back. But more so than most, the word talent applies to Nami. When it comes to navigation, she has something, a thing that cannot be taught, which points us in the general direction of her true lineage. All of which was meant to be revealed in One Piece Movie 10, Strong World. However, there's quite a backstory to this and why it never happened. Strong World was the very first One Piece movie that Eiichiro Oda was personally involved in, and this came after a relentless barrage of requests for Oda to write the film because the One Piece movies at the time were in a bit of a death spiral. To give you some idea, the executive producer of Strong World said the following: "I want the next movie we make to bring back the staff's morale and make it something that gives One Piece a fresh start." That's how bad of a place the One Piece film series was in. It needed a huge change. And so Eiichiro Oda accepted the task and got to work, and part of the One Piece movie revival plan was to stand out by introducing canon elements. The best known of which being the main antagonist of the film, Golden Lion Shiki, a legendary figure in the manga, as he was once a former member of the Rocks Pirates, a villain who Oda had planned on using for his own arc in the manga before ultimately settling on implementing Shiki in this film. But there was a lesser known canon element that was originally going to be inserted into Strong World, and it's lesser known because Oda decided to cut it. In 2016, Oda stated that the initial plot of Strong World was intended to dig into the secret of Nami's birth, and that the planned content of the film had genuinely shocked all of the staff who had read the early draft of the script. The initial film wasn't even titled Strong World, it was titled The Crystal Ship's Log. And it was a surprisingly dramatic script because Oda thought that what the studio wanted of him was a tearjerker, something to really tug on the emotional heartstrings in the same way that most One Piece arcs eventually do, which was a missing ingredient of the films up until this point. The One Piece movies had been pretty good with executing action and comedy, but mostly lackluster when it came to drama, with a few key exceptions. And that's because it's an incredibly difficult task to create that drama with a brand new character in anywhere from 40 to 90 minutes when you already have anywhere from 5 to 10 protagonists to deal with. To their credit, the movies tried, but again, there wasn't enough time to fully flesh out these new characters in a way that felt like they truly belonged in the One Piece world. Which is my personal theory as to why Nami's history was chosen for this movie, because she was already a well-established figure in One Piece. We didn't need to dedicate any time to getting to know her, and as soon as the film began, we would be ready to dive deeper with a character that we'd already formed a connection to. Honestly, as much as I dislike the idea of canon material in extended media, it does seem like a fairly solid way of making the movies worth paying money to see. However, according to an interview that Oda conducted in the Strong World art book, he went a bit overboard with the drama. When I began working on this, I started thinking about what everyone expected from me, probably something dramatic. So thinking they'd want to see a tearjerker, I wrote The Crystal Ship's Log. If it had become a movie just as it was, I think everyone would have really enjoyed it. But when I finished it, there was just something that didn't sit well with me. An emotional story is one that springs up from the life of your characters. But if a writer tries to force emotion as a goal when writing a story, you end up crushing the characters under it. It's the characters that have to make the story. So after I finished writing The Crystal Ship's Logs, thoughts started popping up like, is this really what you wanted to make? Finally, it was at a meeting for revising the scenario where I came clean to everyone and said, I think I'd like to drop this plot. Since it's a project that I decided to take on myself, I told them I wanted to make something brand new, something that would be sure to entertain boys, and that was enough to convince them, which essentially meant that Oda wanted to reduce the heart of the film and amp up the action and adventure for the boys. And you can even tell this directly from the title change. The original title, The Crystal Ship's Log, suggests a more historical tale, whereas the eventual title, Strong World, is very blatant in its promise of high quality action for the target demographic of, again, the boys. And ever since this was discovered by the Western fan base, there has been this sense of having been robbed of Nami's backstory in favor of some more punch fighting. Like, which of these would you rather have? The complete history of Nami or Zoro fighting a fart clown? Because what we got was the latter. And we've got more than just interviews to see what it is we missed out on. Because this tonal change was made, I would say, quite late in the process for an animated film. And in fact, the very first teaser trailer for One Piece Strong World wasn't even for Strong World. It was for The Crystal Ship's Log, because at the time that was still the name of the movie and the plot they were covering. This trailer is quite the historical artifact. It's absolutely impossible to find in any sort of decent quality, at least not with an English translation. And the only reason I even know about it is because I remember watching it at the time it was released, because I am old. And to take you through what happens, we see shots of Sengoku, Garp, Whitebeard, and Shanks, each commenting on the return of Golden Lion Shiki, something that would also never actually happen in the film, because no one except the Straw Hats were aware of Shiki's presence. But there are two very interesting shots in this here teaser trailer. The first is a very solemn looking Nami leaving the Thousand Sunny dressed in her formal wear, which is followed by seeing a letter that she's left on the table. And if you zoom in on that letter, you can even see that it's marked by a tangerine, effectively Nami's signature. So this is extremely different from what Strongworld ended up being, where Nami did still leave the crew, but she did so because Shiki forced her. And then she left the Straw Hats a message on a tone dial asking them to come save her. However, in the Crystal Ship's log teaser trailer, Nami looks like she's leaving the crew of her own volition. And the way that she's marked and prepared the letter shows that this is a premeditated move, and that there's something clearly very wrong happening here. Something more along the lines of when Sanji left the crew on Zou, which was of course linked to his horrible history as a prince of the Germa Kingdom. The rest of the teaser shows the Straw Hats invading Shiki's hideout exactly like they did in the final film, and it ends with a promise that the Crystal Ship's log would be opening soon. And given that it was strongly connected to Nami, I think a solid assumption is that the Crystal Ship was a vessel of the past, one that may have carried baby Nami and made mention of her in its log. So here's a pretty horrifying possibility. The Crystal Ship could have been the vessel of the pirate crew who attacked the Oikot Kingdom, and Nami's parents could have been part of the raid that killed Nojiko's family, as well as left Belle-Mère on the verge of death and without the will to live. That would be a pretty hard emotional reckoning for Nami, to know that her parents were responsible for that. And then we have to talk about Shiki. Whether this is still true or not is very up in the air, but when this film was written, Nami's past was intrinsically linked to GoldenEye and Shiki. As the main antagonist of the Nami-focused movie, he was either going to be another Arlong-like figure to her, or perhaps even flat out Nami's father. So as far as the timeline goes, Shiki escaped from Impel Down 22 years ago, and Nami was born 20 years ago, which is the same year that the Oikot Kingdom was attacked. So there's definitely space to make a bit of a baby there, and we do know that Shiki was specifically fixated on East Blue. His plan was to destroy East Blue because he felt that Roger's life ending in this sea was pathetic, humiliating, and a general insult to a man of his strength. In the final Strongworld film, Shiki does also continuously refer to Nami as baby, or more accurately, baby-chan. Although this is more of a lecherous old man kind of gag. I would be very, very surprised if Oda had ever intended Shiki to be Nami's father, considering how perpetually bricked up he seems to be over her. So it's possible that Nami was also the child of one of his crewmates, and that there could be some Rocks Pirates legacy floating around in there somewhere. And that might be why Shiki originally targeted Nami. In Strongworld, Shiki wanted Nami for her ability to navigate, which he discovers more or less incidentally as she warns him of a coming storm that he couldn't predict. However, in the Crystal Ship's log, I highly suspect that Shiki either already knew about Nami or found out about her some other way and then deliberately targeted her. One scenario could be that Shiki himself found the Crystal Ship and its log, perhaps a legendary vessel housing a world-famous navigator. However, in the past, something went wrong and everyone except for Nami died, and the Crystal Ship's log told of a child of this world-famous navigator, someone who Shiki would then seek out to help complete his plan. And it could also be a lot more brutal than that. Shiki himself could have deliberately killed Nami's parents and only later on discovered that they had a child. Whatever it was going to be, this was going to be the same sort of level as hard-hitting as the best flashbacks in the series, like Robin, like Lauren, you know what, even like Nami's first flashback. Remember that Oda's original goal was to make the audience cry, and that just reading this backstory shocked all of the film staff. So I can't help but feel like we missed out on something special here. Something that probably won't ever come to light in the original manga. Funnily enough though, One Piece film Gold explored more of Nami's backstory than Strongworld did, briefly detailing her relationship with fellow thief Kurina, although unlike elements of Strongworld, none of this is canon. In One Piece Gold Backstage Pass, Eiichiro Oda was asked the following: "Did you have any intention to show Nami's past in this film?" And Oda replied, "No, that's what Mr. Kuroiwa, the scriptwriter, thought about, so I just allowed it. I only told him to not overdo the character. Maybe he thought of Kurina as a character that resembles Nami. Mr. Kuroiwa was also the one who created both Kurina and Mad Treasure, so no, it wasn't in my plan at all. I've also thought of a completely different past story for Nami. Of course, Nami's real parent story is too much." Which sounds like Oda ruminating on his experience of making One Piece Strongworld, because that's exactly what he tried to do then, and discovered, oh, it's too much. Oda did his best to make a Nami's real parent story, and it just didn't feel right. Not only for the target demographic, but Oda also spoke about the dangers of forcing emotion and having that end up crushing the characters. So it seems to me like Nami discovering the story of her birth may actually be a detriment to the character rather than an addition of depth. It's really hard to make a judgment on that from where I stand. I mean, just not knowing what Oda had in mind makes me endlessly curious. But history will show that he definitely made the right decision in terms of the Strongworld film at least, because it's not one of the most highly regarded now, but at the time it was a groundbreaking entry into the franchise that not only revived the One Piece movies, but also catapulted the anime and the manga into a whole new sphere of success. And what's interesting is that I can't help but feel like we would eventually go back to the idea of a more emotional film with One Piece Film Red. Uta's past is that kind of truly horrific experience that may have been intended for Nami, and people do cry at the end of that movie with Uta's implied fate, although I doubt that was ever on the cards for Nami. But when it comes to biological family in One Piece, this is my philosophy. It only matters if the characters themselves care. Biological family matters a lot to Sanji, for example, because he spent his whole life trying to separate himself from them. Whereas in the case of Zoro, his blood relations don't matter at all, even if it's a legendary samurai, because Zoro doesn't care about it one way or the other. And with Nami, I would say that she's more on the Zoro side of the spectrum. To Nami, the only family she's ever known has been Nojiko and Belmer. And if she doesn't care about her past beyond that, then neither should I. And even though we've potentially missed out on a hard-hitting, fully fleshed out Nami backstory, I don't know how much it could have added to her character. I think it would definitely be a point of interest in a handful of videos made by strange men on the internet, but nothing substantive worth taking that time to explore and, more importantly, endure, because it was not gonna be a pleasant story. Although we should also be aware that this unpleasant story does exist in the mind of Eiichiro Oda, as well as everyone else who read that first draft of the Crystal Ship's log, and even though we're now in the final saga of One Piece, it could still be implemented if Oda saw fit. This man in a box has casually spoiled the end of One Piece and you didn't even notice, did you? Bet not. But the box in question is named Gimon. He is 45 years old, he loves him some melons, and he has a birthday on August 5th, which he shares with Vasco Shot and Octopaco, a self-alleged celebrity fishwoman who dreams of marrying a prince. But most intriguingly, way back in 2001, Gimon was stated to be author Eiichiro Oda's favorite character. In fact, the exact quote from Oda is, "Of course I like Luffy, but the character I like most is Gimon. It's hard to think of anyone better than him. Just a man who has been stuck in a treasure box for 20 years. I think that was an amazing setup myself." So how wild is that? You've got the author of One Piece saying, yeah, that Luffy guy is pretty good, but what about Gimon? Now that is a dude in a box. So Gimon had a rather large impact on Oda, although I'd venture so far as to say that Oda is being very, very sneaky with this answer, much like the case where he revealed his top 3 favorite panels in the series. One of them being the party with the Sky Wolves, where Luffy was first shown dancing in the now iconic sun god Nika silhouette. And Oda gave this answer in September 2020, almost a full year before the sun god silhouette was first blatantly shown to us through the Jinbei versus Who's Who fight battle. A lot of the time, it's like Oda's leaving some little breadcrumbs in these messages. Extended clues for strange men on the internet to use to solve fictional mysteries. And on this case, clues that have led us directly to the God Valley incident, to Laugh Tale, and the One Piece, and another thing, which is the elusive Dawn of the World. So let's talk about the ridiculous existence that is Gimon. To start, I know that many people who watched the anime first were shocked to discover that Gimon is actually a canon character in the manga, but he is, as is his story, and he first appears in chapter 22. But I have to say, even in the manga, this chapter feels a lot like watching classic Pokemon, where Ash, Misty, and Brock would run into like a bug catcher or something, and then waste approximately 23 minutes dealing with whatever problem Bugcatcher had before setting off on their next mundane adventure that I actually enjoyed quite a lot as a child. This was very early One Piece, but it was still a strange choice. Even in the days of Romance Dawn, Oda didn't do anything without a greater plan in mind. And to get into why chapter 22 is so important, here is a TLDR of Gimon and the island of rare animals. Luffy, Nami, and Zoro are sailing from a place to another place, but before encountering that second place I said, a third place pops up, and Luffy believes, for no particular reason, that someone on that island could join his crew. So Luffy and Nami decide to explore the island, while Zoro decides to explore a lovely nap. A wise decision, as Luffy and Nami are then forced to undertake the fearsome trial of the forest. However, after discovering a man in a box, they don't do that. This man in a box is named Gimon, and he is the guardian of the island. A man who visited 20 years ago in search of treasure. Treasure which still exists at the top of that kind of just out of reach cliffy thing. However, due to a comical accident, Gimon got stuck in an empty treasure chest and his crew abandoned him. Then 20 years later, some prick in a straw hat rocks up, and that loops around to what we've already covered. From here, Luffy climbs the short hill sort of thing and discovers 5 glorious treasure containment units, of which we actually have 6 in total if you include the one that Gimon is now forced to wear. And speaking of where have we seen 6 treasure chests before? 6 of these exact same looking treasure chests? The answer to that question is God Valley. This may very well have been the origin of these 6 treasure treasure chest, and we'll get into that in a bit. But first, the sinister and evil Monkey D. Luffy claims that he is stealing the precious treasures like the dastardly villain he is. However, Gimon swiftly realized that Luffy was lying to protect him from the fact that he'd spent 20 years trying and failing to reach a treasure that never existed. Luffy then invited Gimon to join the crew, to which Gimon says, "No thanks, monkey. I already have animal friends." And the two groups part ways, never to meet again unless they do. Canonically, it takes the Straw Hats almost exactly the same amount of time to solve Gimon's problem as it did to bring down Doflamingo after arriving on Dressrosa. In both cases, everything was said and done by afternoon tea. So clearly the crew got a lot better at problem solving as time went on. But apart from that little God Valley hint, it seems like a fairly unremarkable story, and one of the most common questions that I see on the internet is simply, what was the point of any of this? In a series where almost every single character introduced goes on to have their own journey and serve a greater purpose down the line, Gimon feels very out of place. Unlike the treasure chest that houses him, Gimon just doesn't quite fit with everything that was, is, and will happen. Or does he? And granted, Oda had a lot more freedom to conduct wacky hijinks back in the day, but why did he take the time and energy to draw this particular story? And I think the initial point of the Island of Rare Animals is even harder to grasp when watching the anime, because the Island of Rare Animals was actually structured quite differently in the manga than the anime. In the manga, this short stop happens immediately after Luffy kicked a clown in the big tops during Orangetown. However, in the anime, the Island of Rare Animals happens after Luffy neuters a cat on Syrup Village. And this is actually quite a massive change because it means that in the anime, Usopp is part of this story. In the manga, there was no Usopp and also no Zoro. He stayed behind on the boat. This was a rare Luffy Nami exclusive adventure. And coming off the back of Orangetown, it was intended to be an extended exploration of the idea of treasure, because Orangetown was all about defining what treasure means to different people. To Buggy, it was gold and other assorted shiny things. To Luffy, it was his straw hat. To Choo Choo, it was the legacy of his master in the form of pet food. And to Mare Boodle, it was Orangetown itself, etc. Lots of people have their treasure, you get the idea. Treasure is subjective, and this Island of Rare Animals is meant to be an extension of that idea. One that actually goes on to hint at the nature of the One Piece itself, which is even bridged by the very first page, which features Nami fixing Luffy's hat and preserving his treasure before we move on. So let's get this out of the way. The Island of Rare Animals is Laugh Tale. Not literally, probably. I guess I can't confirm that. But it's a representation of the idea of Laugh Tale. The reason why no one but Roger's crew have found the fabled island in the last however many centuries, I guess it's at least 8, is because the trials of the Grand Line and the New World were far too difficult to overcome. And even after Roger's execution, there was a clear goal to find Laugh Tale. However, no pirate crew since has been able to overcome the trials required to get there. Just like the Island of Rare Animals. These trials might be more, shall we say, sham in nature, but throughout the past 2 decades spent in a box, many pirate crews have tried and failed to explore the Island of Rare Animals because none of them have been able to overcome Gaimon's Trial of the Forest. Gaimon's trial is more of a Wizard of Oz sort of deal. You know, represent yourself as some grand deity, don't look behind the bush or in that box, no, just leave or else die. And until Luffy arrived, everyone else failed this trial and left. As a short note on the Wizard of Oz, Oda was interviewed on a show called Honmadeka, and he stated that he really enjoyed the Wizard of Oz as a child right up until the ending. He thought that Dorothy and her band of misfits went on such a grand journey that they deserved a real reward. And Oda is on the record as having gotten genuinely mad at the ending of the Wizard of Oz, which is why ever since he has insisted that the One Piece itself will be something deserving of Luffy's effort after such a long journey. And before you say, but internet man, didn't Gaimon's journey not end with a reward as well? Has Oda not done the same thing it is that he hates the most, and made Gaimon's treasure the weird animal friends that he made along the way? And to that I say, no sir. We're in approximately 5% of cases according to my stats, no madam. Because Oda gave Gaimon the reward of a woman in a barrel named Sarfunkel, with the two of them now living happily ever after whilst the rest of the world struggles in pain and misery. And the two of them have even appeared in the credits of film Red listening to Uta's song. Really odd how Gaimon, the most filler of canon characters, continues to remain abrasively relevant, but that'll all make sense shortly. Because we have a couple more things that link the Island of Rare Animals to Laugh Tale, one of which is is the anime portrayal, where due to this shift of events, it's actually Nami who insists on taking a detour to this island, which is known as the Denetsu no Takarajima, which translates as the legendary treasure island, implying that this is actually an incredibly infamous area in the East Blue at the very least. It's well known to pirates, none of whom have been able to claim the legendary treasure for themselves somehow. Because I won't lie, it's difficult to imagine someone like Shanks rocking up to the island and being told to leave by a bush and then just accepting that fate. Well, maybe he would. Shanks is a bit of a wild card. He might listen to bushes. But how about someone like Arlong or Don Krieg? There's no way that pirates like these are listening to any bush. But the chapter number 22 is also, I'm going to say, coincidentally perfectly relevant, as pre-time skip One Piece took place exactly 22 years after the execution of Goldie Roger, with Gimon himself having been trapped on this island and trying to acquire its legendary treasure for almost as long as the entire planet had been seeking out the One Piece. These two events had been playing out almost perfectly in tandem, with the same end goal just on a much different scale. Chapter 22 is also a bizarrely important character. You cannot skip this as much as it feels like filler because a thing. This is probably the most important world-building chapter in all of the East Blue. Chapter 22 is where Oda actually tells us for the first time what the Grand Line and the Red Line are, as well as gives us a full scope view of the planet, which comes to us purely because Gimon can't read maps and a very annoyed Nami has to explain it to him. In addition to this, Gimon hasn't spoken to a single other person in 20 years. Nobody has successfully visited this island in 2 decades. So for all intents and purposes, the island of rare animals seems to be every bit as hidden and as unattainable in this world as Laugh Tale. And Gimon's treasure search has lasted almost as long as the quest for the One Piece itself. And there's also a pretty cool contrast between Gimon and Goldie Roger, with Gimon arriving to his legendary island too late to claim its treasure, and Roger arriving to his legendary island too early, with both of them being forced to wait for Luffy to eventually end their respective stories. And crazily enough, what did Luffy do upon finding Gimon's treasure? Well, just as a certain Roger did, he laughed. He laughed a lot. He thought that the chest being empty was hilarious, an amazing punchline. A wonderful laugh tale. And also, this is an island that doesn't actually have a name. I've been calling it the Island of Rare Animals or the Legendary Treasure Island in the anime. But much like Laugh Tale before Roger's arrival, it doesn't have an actual name. It was just referred to by the characters as what it was, which in this case is an island full of weird, wacky creatures like the Usagi Hebi, the surprisingly chopper-looking Kirin Kodanuki, and also the Kokox, which I believe is meant to be a fox rooster, but it just sort of ends up sounding like 2 dicks. And Gimon himself is also a great living metaphor for the events of the Void Century. Gimon has a very sad speech when the crew first meet him. "I'm stuck and I can't get out. I've been alone on this island for 20 years. You can't imagine how miserable I've been," which is essentially the state of the One Piece world at large following the Void Century. It's been engulfed in misery, with the flooding having created new islands now trapped in their own boxes, unable to be free, powerless to do anything except wait and hope that the dawn of the world is eventually coming to free them. I also think there's something genuinely to be said for the idea that Luffy invited Gimon to join the crew. Yes, Luffy has been known to be a bit crazy with invitations from time to time, such as when he invited Zombie Tree, also known as McDonald, to join on Thriller Bark. But by and large, these aren't played as genuine invitations, whereas Gimon's absolutely was. This was a heartfelt moment. Luffy saw something in this box, and in that box was a man that Luffy wanted on his crew, someone who could have been alongside them during their walk to Arlong Park, or bravely fighting to stop Operation Utopia on Alabasta, and even declaring war on the world government at any slobby in order to save Nico Robin. Gimon could have been there for all of these events. There's definitely something special about him and his situation that is very close to Oda's heart. And so it really wouldn't surprise me if this was Oda layering in some small-scale foreshadowing for what Laugh Tale would eventually go on to become. Because we do need to remember that back in these very early days, Oda was planning on finishing One Piece in 5 years, meaning that he'd already decided how this story was going to end. It's just that along the way, we got a bit distracted, ended up doing some real cool things, but we're still on course for the original ending that he had planned in 1997. And another fairly hilarious vision into the future provided by Gimon is that when you look at Gimon's original concept art, it looks like at one stage he was going to have Zeph's design, just with a monobrow, because he looked shockingly similar to how young Zeph looked in Sanji's flashback. Oda quickly pivoted to a more wacky design design though. And in the anime, Gimon also refers to himself as a god, a Mamorigami, the Gami part being a Rendaku of Kami, which is god, a god of the forest, which is also one of the known worship deities in the One Piece world alongside the sun god. And look, I'm not saying that Gimon is actually a Luffy-esque potential god reincarnation, but I am saying that a lot of these late game ideas just so happen to have worked their way into this previously thought of irrelevant patch of story. And speaking of gods, let's all channel our inner Sanji and focus on that sweet, sweet chest. As a warning, this is a pretty wild theory, but I refuse to ignore it because during the God Valley incident depicted in Bartholomew Kuma's flashback, we were shown 6 treasure chests containing prizes for the native hunting tournament. And we know what at least 2 of those prizes were. One was Kuma's devil fruit, the Niku Niku no Mi, and the other was Kaido's devil fruit, which was a handful of seconds away from being eaten by Emporio Ivankov. Assumedly, the 4 other chests included devil fruit prizes as well. Likely insanely powerful fruits, and we do not know where these chests ended up, but they were the main source of conflict for the God Valley incident. So assuming someone like Rox or Roger managed to acquire the chests, these 6 prizes would have become quite infamous, and perhaps over time, these chests were taken from West Blue to East Blue, and it was said that they were hidden on a secret island, a legendary treasure island. However, they were all empty, perhaps left as a red herring or a gloat, and I don't know what. But I just find it fascinating that 6 chests of the exact same design have appeared twice now. When this happened in the manga, I said that it was a pretty ridiculous theory and very unlikely to be true, especially because it's assumed that one of those chests was used for Baby Shanks. It's not confirmed though, other chests are available. And we've never actually seen the full chest that Baby Shanks was in, only a very vague sketch from the Film Red special volume. But I do think it would be a really cool connection if Gaimon's treasure did have this history to it. And at the same time, it would give Luffy yet another legacy to end by finally putting a full stop on the God Valley incident 36 years later. God Valley took place 38 years ago, but Luffy found Gaimon 36 years ago. Did a time skip, therefore maths equals 36, which I only point out because otherwise someone's going to try and actually with numbers in the comments. Now, this isn't to say that Oda had God Valley planned out by chapter 22 and was intricately placing these chests. I actually think it would be more like the reverse, and that Oda remembered these chests from Gaimon's story and then planted them in the God Valley flashback, all of which is very possible when you remember that Gaimon is apparently Oda's favorite character. You may have forgotten about him, but Oda did not. And by the end of One Piece, like every other element, I think that we're going to look back on Gaimon and strongly appreciate what Oda was laying out right in front of us on the island of rare animals. Monkey D. Dragon is too powerful. So powerful that any move he makes, if implemented even slightly incorrectly, could cause a catastrophe of historic proportions should anyone survive to record it. So a few months ago, I made a video outlining why it feels like Dragon does nothing in One Piece. That video was primarily a meta-analysis of how Oda implements Dragon in the series, which tallied up every appearance he'd had in One Piece, which at the time was 29 times, and of those 29, 23 of them featured Dragon sitting, standing, or monologuing, aka doing nothing, which gave us a Dragon do nothing rate of 79.3%. The rate's actually higher now because he's appeared a couple more times, again, doing nothing, so we're somewhere in the 80s. But to be clear, as fun as the meme is, I don't personally think that in-world Dragon is doing nothing. More that Oda portrays him as doing nothing the vast majority of the time, and I think he should have been much more sparing with Dragon's appearances. But the truth of the matter is that Dragon is so strong that it's actually chastised him. In the same sort of way that Whitebeard was only really able to show a fraction of his power, because using any more could quite literally destroy the world. And Dragon, he's very observant, especially in regards to the East, which is actually over there. But Dragon has learned from the actions of those around him, which include Whitebeard, Roger, Garp, and even his own spawn, Luffy. Dragon is a man of complex motivation, which we're going to dissect in this video. However, his primary role is not, and has never been, to be the direct agent of change. Rather, Dragon's purpose in this series is to be the man who fans the flame of revolution. And before getting into this, I should also say that Parvision also has a good video on this topic, which I have linked in the description. He made some good points. One of which is that almost every major faction in this series consists of more or less the same structure. Whether it's pirates or marines, there's a tendency to stack the top with heavy hitters who carry the faction on the front lines. Like the 3 admirals, the 3 all-stars, the 3 sweet commanders after Snack got the boot, and even right at home with the monster trio of the Straw Hats. One Piece is a shonen manga, so generally the higher we go go, the more powersome the character. And this is even true of the 5 Elder Stars, who were for some time thought of as more traditional politicians, just regular old dudes making decisions from their old man room. But Egghead Island proved us very otherwise. The Revolutionary Army is a very different entity though. A lot of the other factions in One Piece stack their top with power because its main purpose is direct combat. However, the Revolutionary Army does not exist to fight people's battles for them, but instead to encourage people and give them the ability to fight for themselves, as can prominently be seen, for example, through the abilities of Bella Betty, who increases the power of those around her with rousing topless speeches. Thinking about it, Luffy and Dragon actually have very similar philosophies of liberation. As the not hero Luffy is, he will not help people who refuse to help themselves, like when he refused to help Momonosuke up until the child said that he wanted to be Kaido. And even in the most extreme case, when it came to Nico Robin, he still waited for her to say that she wanted to live. It's not good enough for Luffy to step into other people's business and fix the problem, because if the person he helps doesn't learn from this and grow a stronger will, then that problem is just going to happen again down the line. And I believe that this is Dragon's view with the Revolutionary Army as well, except that he and Luffy disagree on the ultimate methodology, with Luffy taking a very active approach to this problem solving. That is the magic of Luffy. He sees beating someone up as the solution to all of life's problems. Dragon does not. And in fact, Dragon often sees his forces engaging in direct combat as an almost guaranteed way to make things worse, which is why his operations are usually more founded in espionage. So to take Bella Betty as an example again, she herself is probably quite powerful, but her purpose is not to fight directly. And that goes for the rest of the commanders as well. All of them are in their positions primarily for what they provide to support and logistics. Karasu's Logia powers are primarily utilized for scouting and transportation, Morley's ground manipulation for infiltration, and of course Lindbergh is basically the Q of the Revolutionary Army, constructing all sorts of fun assorted gadgets. Each of them can fight, and at very high levels as well, as we saw them taking on admirals at Marangeois, but the goal there was never to beat the admirals. It was to distract them so that they could free Kuma. Even Emporio Ivankov can be seen as a support figure through his hormone injections, which can force a Bella Betty style effect if needed. And really, the only person I'd maybe call a straightforward fighter within the army is Sabo. And that's because Sabo is a very literal representation of the flame of revolution, especially now with his brand new and shiny Flame Emperor title, which you might think takes away from Dragon a bit. Hey, Sabo mate, this is my army, I'm the head top guy, but it actually doesn't. Because Dragon, in all of his winsome glory, has again always had the primary role of serving as the fan of the flame of revolution. Let's talk about wind. In literature, wind is often described as one of the 4 following symbols. Wind is a symbol of strength, it is a symbol of freedom, a symbol of change, and a symbol of one more thing that I'm not going to tell you now because it's going to be relevant and fun later. Look forward to it. But again, Dragon is not that flame himself. That role has been given to many other characters across history, with Luffy and Sabo being the 2 most prominent figures in the modern day that Dragon is fanning. But Dragon's first experience of this flame was Goldie Roger. Dragon was present at Roger's execution, which is something we often ignore because it seems to have such little bearing on Dragon's actions. But like everyone else around him, this day was a very formative event for Dragon. On this day 24 years ago, Roger lit a flame that would rapidly spiral out of control, manifesting as the Great Age of Piracy. That was Roger's intention, and it did ignite the events that would eventually lead to the dawn of the world, or at least I assume so. It still has yet to happen. It would be unfortunate if it didn't. However, Roger's action also resulted in terrible events happening as well. The mass killing of infants in South Blue, the dramatic global rise of piracy victims, the reign of the 4 emperors and the 7 warlords coming to prominence and causing untold pain and suffering across the planet in the name of becoming the next pirate king. And if we wanted to name a very specific example, then that name would belong to Don Quixote do Flamingo, who, as a direct result of Roger, went on to become the tyrannical ruler of Dressrosa, having killed thousands and destroyed the lives of hundreds of thousands. And that's just that one nation. He also started his own slavery business with the auction house on Sabadi and was a bit of a general dickbag. But the argument here is that Dragon saw what Roger's actions resulted in, and Dragon experienced what happens with an uncontrolled flame, which was, yes, a great degree of good, but at the cost of a tremendous amount of pain and suffering, none of which Roger intended, but it happened nonetheless. And not only that, but Dragon has also seen the results of the other side of the spectrum. It's heavily implied that he was once a Marine, and he has also borne witness to the flames lit by the world government, which have also resulted in that tremendous pain and suffering. So Dragon doesn't want to start any uncontrolled fires. He's seen what they do. It's not good. So when the flame of revolution does take hold of the planet, Dragon wants to fan it very precisely, so that it can be as effective as possible and minimize the amount of suffering, which some may argue is futile, but Dragon is trying nonetheless. Whereas his son Luffy is more on the Roger side of the spectrum when it comes to actions. However, as stated previously, the way in which Luffy conducts these actions is actually more on the dragon side, because Luffy inevitably inspires those he's helping, which leaves the islands he intervenes in significantly stronger, and more importantly, significantly more united than before. And that's because Luffy, as the main protagonist, and the man who has inherited the will of a sun god, sits very much in a happy place where things almost always work out for the best somehow. No one else in the world is in his position. And while Dragon likely possesses immense personal power, that also comes with immense personal responsibility. Because Dragon is so powerful that even a minor misuse of his abilities could result in a historical tragedy. To use this example again, another person in his position would be Whitebeard. Sengoku claims that Whitebeard had the power to destroy the entire world, and given that he wanted to protect his family, Whitebeard could never use the full extent of those abilities. Even during his last stand at the Paramount War, Whitebeard couldn't think of anything except for the safety of his sons. And if it was just Whitebeard alone on that battlefield, then he could have effectively snapped the Marines out of existence. Which is part of what makes Blackbeard so dangerous, because he and his crew have such reckless disregard for their own lives. To them, it's all up to fate, so I wouldn't be surprised to see Blackbeard use the Gura Gura even more potently than Whitebeard did. But speaking of Whitebeard, he is another cautionary tale for Dragon. When Ace was captured, Whitebeard dropped everything and summoned his full forces to engage in the Paramount War, which on paper, terrible idea. Not only did it lead to Whitebeard's death, it also led to the dissolution of the Whitebeard pirates, and it put every island under his protection in dire peril. But also, it didn't even work out. Whitebeard failed to rescue Ace, he died anyway, and from many perspectives, this could be judged as one of the biggest mistakes in One Piece world history. And perhaps events like this are the reason why Dragon doesn't do things like say drop everything because Ginny has been abducted by a world noble. Because Dragon sees the risk as far too great. We can't just summon our full forces for one person because we're gonna get destroyed. Which brings us back to the symbolism of wind. Again, I said it had 4 major meanings. Wind is a symbol of strength, freedom, change, and it is the symbol of uncertainty. And of all the words I would use to describe Monkey D. Dragon, uncertainty is I think what suits him best. As a windmill, Dragon possesses strength, and he is working towards freedom and change, but he is perpetually plagued by the uncertain outcomes of his actions. TLDR, Dragon's power is one of those situations where your will of D is so big that you need to be extremely careful when you turn around, because it's gonna cause some damage. But Dragon also has one more thing contributing to that uncertainty. During one of the many Egghead Island flashbacks, we see Dragon speaking with Vegapunk on Ohara, and Vegapunk states that Dragon has a hatred of war. And even before then, it had been heavily suspected for quite some time that Dragon either is or was a pacifist. He has no desire to harm anyone. And if we look back on it, the only confirmed person who has ever been harmed by Dragon's actions was Buggy when he was attempting to execute Luffy in Logtown. But Dragon isn't quite as trigger happy to enact change personally as opposed to other people on his level. So he's all about min-maxing revolutions, which to his credit has led to the rather brilliant food shortage strategy at Marijois. With minimum effort and casualties, the Revolutionary Army was able to strike the Marijois food reserves, which is now threatening a famine amongst the world nobles. It's very clever because the world nobles insist on separating themselves from surface society, which has put them in a very easy position to be sieged, because living 10,000 meters above the rest of the world makes importing food a logistical nightmare. And now, instead of fighting against the world government or the Marines directly, those factions are beginning to turn on one another, all because the world nobles can't have their precious snacks. Although there is a potential solution to that problem now, which is if York can find a way to power the Egghead Island food replicators in the Holy Land, then this famine could sort itself out. But the point is that this shows Dragon's thought process. As we've explored before, Luffy, he solves his problems by beating up the problem-making guy. And if Luffy was charged with figuring this out, then his plan would be to walk up to Emu and thwack him in the face. However, as much as St. Charles might say, Dragon, my eyes are up here, Dragon is aiming lower, but not too low. Get back up a bit. There. Dragon's plan was to strike them right in their well-rounded bellies. And that actually makes me wonder what Luffy would think of his father's actions. A lot of Luffy's empathy in One Piece revolves around food, like becoming Rebecca's ally for life after she gave him lunch even though she tried to kill him, or beating Kaido so that Tama could eat whenever she wanted. And the world nobles are undeniably despicable, but I don't know if I could ever see Luffy being okay with anyone, no matter how horrendous starving. But to add to Dragon's support role in this whole endeavor, we should also talk about the previous revolutionary island base Baltico. In the manga, every establishing shot of this island is plagued with wind, the kind of winds that we usually only see whenever Dragon is present. It's characterized by these rather thick white lines, indicating something quite fierce and elementally unstoppable, which we've seen both in Logtown and the Grey Terminal as well. And something that still hasn't been quite explained yet is why nobody could find Baltico until Jesus' bird Vergis hitched a ride from Dressrosa. And from there, Blackbeard had to be led to the island via Vergis's Vivia card. It's like how seemingly the only way to find Zoe is to possess the Vivia card of someone currently on that island. So another potential reason as to why it looks like Dragon is doing nothing is because he could be using his powers to obscure the Revolutionary Army base. Dragon could have any number of weather-based abilities, not just wind, and may have influenced the magnetic force of the island and not allowed log poses to lock onto it or something. Or he could have done something more like Nami and create mirages, a colossal Fata Morgana obscuring the island from view. It could also be that the wind he creates is just so fierce that you would never sail into it. But in that case, you'd always know where the Revolutionary Army are. They're in the windy place. But again, this could explain why Dragon almost never makes a move himself. He has to be present to shroud the base of the army, which would otherwise be crushed by either pirates, marines, or even Cypherpol. And that would make Bartholomew Kuma's flashback hit even harder. It's not an amazing look for Dragon to have found out exactly where Ginny was taken and then done nothing to get her back. When I talked about this during the chapter reviews, I had a fair few people justify it by saying that the Revolutionary Army simply were not equipped to take on the challenges of invading Marijuana just for Ginny. And that, whilst not thematically satisfying, may indeed be true. However, I think it would be absolutely ball-crushing for the real answer to be that Dragon had to make an impossible choice. He could have gone with Kuma to search for Ginny, and he may very well have succeeded in finding and rescuing her, but it would have left the entire army vulnerable, and he had to stay and protect them for the greater good. Doing the exact opposite of what figures like Luffy and Whitebeard would have done, which is bet everything on the life of a single person. Luffy declared war on the world government to save Robin, which in his case worked out. Whitebeard declared war on the world government to save Ace, and in that case, it didn't work out. It's the uncertainty of the outcome. Yes, Dragon could have taken action. Together with Kuma, they may very well have been able to save Ginny, but at what cost? Dragon is well aware of his role in this story. He recognizes that he is not the main character, and thus he needs to play the fictional pirate game a bit more carefully than most. And when the time is finally right, he will fan the flames of revolution in just the right direction, at just the right ferocity, to bring down the world government. But as of right now, he's still uncertain as to exactly what that direction is, but hopefully it's east, because he has a lot of experience with that particular direction. Blackbeard is about to go after one of the ancient weapons, and what we have is a coin flip. Heads, Wano is destroyed, and tails, Fishman Island is destroyed. I picked tails for Fishman Island because all of the mermaids have tails. But no matter which catastrophic event occurs, this will bring Blackbeard to within a cherry pie's distance of finally enacting his ultimate ambition, which is to create the Age of Darkness. So ages are a very interesting concept in One Piece, mostly because they're quite vague and yet also universally known and recognized. But in the entire history of fictional pirates, we've only referenced 4 ages thus far. The oldest one is known as the Age of Heaven. This was Alabaster's ancient history briefly told by Robin, which is so old that we don't even know where it falls into the timeline, but it could have been over 5,000 years. The second age we know of is the Age of Cayenne, which translates as Age of the Sea Circle. This is a period of world history that took place around 400 years ago, and that was the age that contains Noland and Calgara. The third named age is the one we're probably the most familiar with, as it began immediately after Roger's execution. His final words sparked the Daikaizoku Jidai, the Great Pirate Era, which has also been referred to as the Golden Age of Piracy. And the final age is the one that we're currently living in, which has no official name as of yet, but it has been referred to as the New Age. The first instance of such was Doflamingo on Jaya, who was eagerly anticipating the eventual conflict with Whitebeard as a full stop to the Great Age of Piracy. And what the world is currently going through right now is the struggle to define the New Age, like how Roger defined the Great Age of Piracy. To take things back to Doflamingo, his plan was something world domination, with the idea of dictating what the New Age was according to his flamingo-y desires, which we don't know a lot about, but it was described by Doflamingo as an era where only the strongest survived, which is probably at least partially inspired by Kaido's ideas as well, considering that Doflamingo was the Joker in his pirate deck. Kaido had a similar ambition. He wanted to make the New Age in his image, which ideally was to embroil the world planet in the greatest and most destructive war ever seen, where only the strong would remain, and ideally he would be the strongest of all of the strong, much like how he structures the hierarchy of the Beast Pirates. And he may well have achieved this through an alliance with Big Mom, were it not for those meddling kids stopping that raid on Onigashima. But the struggle of age definition also extends to the Marines as well, although we're more familiar with their terminology of justice. Currently, Fleet Admiral Sakazuki is a contender to define this new age as an era of of absolute and thorough justice, and unintentionally Luffy is also part of this race. He's not actively striving to define an age in his image, but the series is likely to end with him enacting the dawn of the world, and so the name of this new era may end up being the Age of Dawn or something along those lines. But right now, we are a long way from that. Because Blackbeard is a very real and very strong contender to define the new age. And to be fair, I do think he has the strongest claim to the new age at the moment, as he did kill Whitebeard. And he certainly believes this because after acquiring Whitebeard's devil fruit, Blackbeard assaulted the ears of anyone who possessed them with the following: "Tell the world, to all you commanders who love boring peace, to the navy, to the world government, and to all the pirates, the future of the world has just been decided." Yes, as of today, my era begins. And the era of Blackbeard would no doubt be something along the lines of the Age of Darkness. But we're currently 2 years into this new age and nobody has succeeded in defining it yet. And that's because the status quo has yet to be sufficiently destabilized. So for Blackbeard to bring his ambition to fruition, he needs to do something big, real big, and practically world-ending. And there's only a handful of ways to achieve that. Even with top-tier physical power and the greatest of magical fruit, what Blackbeard needs is at least one ancient weapon to enact the Age of Darkness. And he's currently in quite a lucky position in that regard. In fact, it's very similar to starting a new Pokemon game. Blackbeard has woken up in Pallet Town to head over to Professor Oak's lab, and waiting for him there is a choice of 3 ancient weapons. Now, unfortunately, one of them, Uranus, has already been taken by his rival trainer Emu, and Blackbeard is now only able to choose between 2. Except in this case, Professor Oak is Professor Swamp, because now that Caribou has fanboyed his way to Hachinosu, Blackbeard has 2 options that he previously did not have access to. At this very moment, Caribou is the most pivotal character in the world, because he knows the location of both Pluton and Poseidon. He's been there, and not only that, he knows the true nature of both of them as well. And in order to compete with the raw power of Uranus held by the world government, Blackbeard needs to make a very important world-changing decision right here, because both Pluton and Poseidon are extremely vulnerable and waiting to be seized by whichever handsome pirate manages to find them first. And when it comes down to it, Caribou actually joining the Blackbeard pirates is a pretty useless plot point unless one of 2 things happen. Thing number the first, Blackbeard attacks Wano to take Pluton, or thing number 2, Blackbeard attacks Fishman Island to take Poseidon. Because as much as I love Swamp Nakama, his decade-plus character arc doesn't amount to a whole lot if the information he possesses isn't put to use. So which is the most reasonable decision? To this, I would say that Wano sticks out pretty immediately. There's a couple of good reasons why Blackbeard would choose to target Pluton on Wano. The first is that Wano is very close to Hachinosu, significantly closer to Fishman Island, and even if the borders are still up, it is much easier to access. Going up the waterfall is far less treacherous than trying to ride the deep sea currents. And the Blackbeard pirates also have a crew member who can teleport people over a currently unknown but definitely very large distance. So there may not even be a need to sail up the waterfall at all. And Shanks himself, who we generally agree is quite clever, also thought that Wano was Blackbeard's next most logical target. Shanks expected Blackbeard to be on the Wano shortly after Luffy defeated Kaido. That's almost certainly why the Red Hair pirates were sailing nearby just in case, ready to intercept Blackbeard and put a halt to his nefarious ideals. But that didn't happen, which is interesting because up until recently, Wano was a compulsory excursion for anyone wanting to become the Pirate King, because it was very common knowledge that Kaido had one of the road poneglyphs. So I do think it's very logical for Shanks to assume that Blackbeard would have taken the opportunity to retrieve that mystery cube after Kaido's defeat. But another reason for Shanks' deduction may be because he assumed, or at least thought there was a possibility, that Blackbeard already knew about Pluton. Either way, Blackbeard being on Wano is a bad combination. However, Blackbeard didn't end up taking this opportunity, which is quite lucky because as it turns out, he did not fall into the red-headed trap. Instead, he took a much simpler path, waiting for Trafalgar Law near Winter Island, and fought a much easier battle to acquire Law's 2 road poneglyph rubbings. Really can't argue with the results of that, but it's likely that Blackbeard did not know about Pluton. Not at the time. But would his plan change now that he does? I'm honestly not sure if it would, because narratively, it would feel a bit meh. We spent 4 very real-world years liberating Wano, and if Blackbeard was to attack, then the first thing to happen after the Straw Hats left the country would be it immediately coming under command of another emperor. It just doesn't feel like the right move. Although I can't deny the vision of Blackbeard using Whitebeard's devil fruit to forcibly break the borders of Wano is a pretty epic mental image. And whilst the samurai are very powersome, I do think that they would fall to the full force of the Blackbeard pirates. Because really, all it took was one marine Marine Admiral to threaten the entire country, and Blackbeard, quite handily, has one of those, as well as many other strong beings as well. I do feel like this opportunity has probably passed though. I think that Shanks expecting Blackbeard to show up and then him not doing that tells us that Blackbeard's focus is elsewhere, and that we should be very, very afraid for the fate of Fishman Island. When Shirahoshi was revealed to possess the power of Poseidon, this came with a warning. If the rest of the world caught wind of this secret, everything would be thrown into chaos. Powerful forces would seek out the princess's power, both pirates and government alike, which made it clear that at some point someone is gonna go after Shirahoshi, and all of our pieces currently point to that individual being Blackbeard. Lafitte is currently at the headquarters of Deep Sea Current to meet one of the underworld emperors whose specialty is transportation, and his epithet isn't just some lovely sounding title. It actually refers to something we've already referred to in this video, which are the incredibly dangerous deep sea currents of the One Piece world, which are used by various ne'er-do-wells to operate naughty businesses and transport armies outside of world government control. But the key thing is that the only way you can reach Fishman Island is by going through these deep sea currents, which we have seen the Straw Hats do, and without their frankly absurd abilities, they would have died on multiple occasions just trying to visit Fishman Island. The other ship we've seen dive to Fishman Island was Roger's crew, so it tends to be manageable with a tight crew aboard one vessel, and that's why Fishman Island, despite being right under the world government, having no real military might of their own, have still managed to remain a sovereign kingdom. Because logistically, there is no force capable of transporting an entire invading army through the deep sea currents. Let's say you had 100 ships. Each ship would need to have its own Nami level navigator and Straw Hat level crew to solve all of the problems. So you'd end up losing probably more than 90% of your army before you even got there. However, Deep Sea Current Sumit is potentially the only person on this planet to have found a way to travel through the deep sea currents en masse, which is currently the crux of his business empire. However, as flagged in chapter 1126, Blackbeard currently has a standing army of pirates on Hachinosu just waiting for Blackbeard to give them the order to conquer the planet. And so I believe that Lafitte has the integral role of hypnotizing Umit and or his company to have them use their expertise to transport this army, which probably wouldn't be needed if the target was Wano or another surface island. Blackbeard needs someone who specializes specifically in the deep sea currents. But here's the interesting thing, right? Blackbeard was already planning whatever was going on here before Caribou told him about Poseidon. In fact, the last we saw, Caribou still had yet to even meet Blackbeard. So it may not have been his plan to go to Fishman Island directly. Blackbeard may have had other ideas to use the deep sea currents to attack any number of locations, but with Caribou's information, Fishman Island could very well be the target now. And they do think that Shirahoshi is the best possible ancient weapon to target for Blackbeard and Blackbeard alone, because the issue with going after Pluton is that it's a bit of an unknown quantity of an ancient weapon. I mean, we know it's a ship, but even if you get it, you need someone who knows how to operate it and sail it and navigate it and whatever the crap this future ship needs. In the case of the Straw Hats, that's an incredibly easy task because you have Frankie, who has actually seen the blueprints and understands the inner workings of Pluton. But the Blackbeard pirates don't even have a dedicated shipwright, at least not one that's been identified. If they did, it would have to be one of the members they recruited during Impel Down, because the original Blackbeard pirates all have roles already and none of them is shipman. And this lack of shipwright skill is reflected in the vessels of the Blackbeard pirates, which are pretty cool. I really love the simplistic log raft style, but they don't really scream sophisticated sailing. And not only that, but they also have San Juan Wolf, who is referred to as a colossal battleship himself. So these days, they're not even necessarily relying on constructed vessels at all. So I really don't think they have any business sailing the most technologically sophisticated ship ever built. But Shirahoshi and Poseidon, mate, they are just so easy. Shirahoshi may seem like a bad target at first because she can't even control her own abilities. However, considering that Lafitte is a hypnotist, she seems like the most logical target. You acquire Shirahoshi and you hypnotize her into controlling all of the Sea Kings on your behalf. And they have an extremely easy way of transporting a colossal mermaid as well, either via teleportation from Van Alga or by stuffing her into Caribou's swamp universe. And it would be quite thematically appropriate as well, as Shirahoshi's dream is to live under the sun. But after being taken by Blackbeard, you have that thematic threat of being trapped in the darkness and praying for the sun god to show up to bring light back to your world, which could be Luffy quite literally fulfilling a promise that Joy Boy was unable to do for the ancient mermaid princess. But there's more here, because this could also lead to the prophecy of the destruction of Fishman Island. I've made a whole video on this if you're interested, but Madame Charlie is never wrong. And if she says that it's going to be destroyed by this suspiciously Luffy-looking person, then it's going to be destroyed by a suspiciously Luffy-looking person. And wouldn't you know, the Blackbeard pirates, they just happen to have an ability to create suspiciously looking Luffy person. All we need is Katarina Devon to transform into him. It's implied that Devon needs to touch a target in order to assume their appearance, which we saw when she gave Saint Saturn a lovely pat on his, what would you call it, a spider appendage, before claiming that her mission was complete. He then warped away with Van Alga. But let's cut back to what happened slightly before that, which is the still unanswered question of who gave Luffy all of that food on Egghead Island and who moved him away to the location where a squad of Marines were so surprised to find him. Now that Egghead Island is over, I really don't think there's any answer to this question that doesn't start with a V and end in an Alga. Van Alga warped the food to Luffy because they needed to create enough chaos to access Saint Saturn. But Van Alga could also have warped Luffy away to where the Marines found him, but before they did that, given Katarina Devon a chance to touch him as well. And if so, what we now have is a situation where Fishman Island doesn't even need to be aggressively invaded. The territory is under Luffy's protection, and if someone looking like Luffy shows up, then their guard will be down. And then, in the snap of a Spandam spine, Blackbeard will have acquired one of the 3 ancient weapons and would be in prime position to enact the incoming Age of Darkness. I am going to flip a coin. If it lands on heads, then you become the Pirate King. Wealth, fame, power, other things, it's all yours. Whereas if it lands on other heads, the frownier heads, then you die, a horrible donut-related death. No time for second thoughts, let's go. So today on Man in a Room, who talks about fictional pirates, we are going to get into a very core feature of this series that is shockingly overlooked, and it is smiley faces. Given that the entirety of this story centers around the concept of a Joy Boy, it should be no surprise that Eiichiro Oda has incorporated the motif of smiles ever since the very first page of the series. As when Roger was confronted with the face of tragedy, he simply responded with the face of lol. One Piece has always been about subversive duality, which is just a really fancy way of saying 2 things, each doing the thing that the other one should be doing. The Will of D is a prime example of this. Each mighty D wielder has the exact same response when confronted with death. It's not fear, it's not sadness, in fact, it's not any of the bad things that we typically associate with this experience. Instead, it's a delightsome smile. Eiichiro Oda's use of subversive smiles in One Piece is almost to the point of pervasive, such as the smile devil fruits cursing their unknowing consumers with one of the most horrifying conditions I have ever witnessed in all of media. But then you add in another layer that this forced happiness was made by a substance called sad, which itself was made by a smiling clown. And clowns, they're meant to bring happiness. Instead, this clown made sad, and the sad made happy, but the happy was still sad. Those are the kind of layers that we're dealing with here. And here's where we get to the point. The part where in the comments people say video starts at this time, because you may think that Luffy is the ultimate representation of this smile idea. However, he is only one side of the coin, with the other being his brother Ace, both of whom are represented by the comedy and tragedy smiley faces on Ace's trademark hat. Ace could have, and even arguably should have been, the Pirate King, because he was quite literally born for that purpose. But Ace also had the inherited will to be Joy Boy, and could have even been the sun god Nika himself, what with all of the literal suns it is that he managed to craft. Ace's fate was decided in one moment by a simple coin flip. One decision that could have changed the entire course of this world. It's no coincidence that the very final shot of Banaro Island is Ace's hat, with the tragedy and comedy smiles flipped. This is how the coin landed for Ace. The happy is now sad, and the sad is now happy. It's also no coincidence that Ace lost his hat after this. I don't know where it could have gone. Doesn't matter though, he doesn't need it because by that point his fate was sealed and the coin was no longer needed. At this point, everything was settled. Luffy was going to become the Pirate King and Ace was going to die a horrible donut-related death, but it very easily could have been the other way around. So let's talk about why Ace ever existed to begin with. Ace's biology was concocted as a result of Roger realizing that he would not live to fulfill the ultimate will of Joy Boy. Roger understood exactly when and where this fate would be fulfilled, and he decided, hey, I'ma make a special present just for this occasion. And furthermore, when quizzed on who would become the next Pirate King, Roger said, and I quote, "The next Pirate King is going to be the Will of D. The Will of D's nuts, cause it's my son, ha ha ha." But that is a lot of expectations to put on a child without knowing a single thing about them, primarily because, you know, they don't exist yet. And as a result, Ace grew up in a perpetual state of existential crisis. And one of the exchanges that left the most impact on me was when Ace asked Garp whether or not he should have been born. And Garp simply answered, "You'll have to live to find out." And that worked out well, didn't it? In the end, the answer was maybe and possibly that he was only born with the sole purpose to die. Very Jesus-like, really, which is only made more allegorical by the fact that Ace carries a literal cross on his back with Whitebeard's tattoo. But Ace is that fancy term that subversive duality at work. He was born for one purpose, and everyone has expectations that he is the one who is going to do the thing. The world government wanted to kill him, anticipating a future pirate king. His late father was certain that he would be the next king, and Yamato had no doubt that Ace was going to bring about the dawn of the world. The entire world was just sitting patiently, waiting for Ace to rock it. The only ones who didn't were, interestingly enough, the ex-members of the Roger Pirates, Shanks and Rayleigh specifically, presumably because both of them knew about Luffy's words and decided to bet on him in this 50-50. But for everyone else, Ace was the second coming of Pirate God. In fact, he was the second in a lot of things. The second Roger, the second expected Pirate King, and even the second division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates, which really does cement the fact that despite initially being named Goldie, everything about Ace was much more of a silver medal. But as a result, it's not hard to see why Ace was less than keen in following in his father's footsteps. To be clear, Ace doesn't necessarily hate Roger, because he did get very defensive whenever anyone insulted his father. Actually, defensive is the wrong word. What's the right one? Attackive. There we go. Attackive. Ace got very attackive and viciously beat the crap out of people. But when you've been raised in the shadow of the most infamous criminal to have ever lived, resentment is probably quite a natural feeling. In fact, even considering who he was raised by, which basically boils down to Garp and Whitebeard and what we're going to call the 2.5 men model, both of those men held the utmost respect for Roger, but both of them were also fierce rivals and enemies of Roger. And that mixture really does sum up Ace quite nicely. Huge degree of respect for his father, but also a huge degree of animosity. And on top of that, Ace's brother wanted to become the Pirate King himself, and so Roger's legacy became completely inescapable for Ace. That does bring up one key point though. Luffy wanted to become the Pirate King, which means that Ace never would have pursued that path. True enough, but let's just say that if one tiny event went just a little bit differently, then Luffy's dreams would be much less of an issue. Just like the smiles on his hat, Ace's destiny could have gone either way. He could have become the Joy Boy or the Tragedy Boy. Luffy may have the literal Nika Devil Fruit, but Ace inherited his own sun god-esque qualities. Ace's first Spade Pirates crew member, Master Juice, was both present for Ace's consumption of the Merimeri no Mi, but also later went on to state that he and the rest of the pirates saw Ace like the sun, this beacon of warmth and power to gather around. In addition to this, Ace was able to win the approval of Jinbei, captain of the Sun Pirates, and as mentioned before, this gets quite literal when Ace is capable of creating miniature suns to use in fruit-based fight battling. Seriously, if we knew about all of this stuff, the Joy Boys, the Sun Gods pre-time skip, then the leading theory would be that he was Ace and not Luffy. Also, here's a fun thing. Have you ever realized that Ace had more brothers than just Luffy and Sabo? During his travels, Ace met both Shanks and Buggy, two children who Roger did actually raise aboard the Oro Jackson since they were teeny tiny babbies. So in a way, they're kind of like spiritual brothers, having been raised by Ace's father. In fact, one of the relationships I enjoy most in One Piece was that very short-lived Ace-Buggy dynamic, because Buggy quite liked Ace. He even mentioned that, unlike Luffy, Ace is a pretty cool dude. To be fair though, Ace didn't kick him in the balls, so that probably helped Buggy's impression of him. But then Ace and Buggy threw a party together and became drinking buddies. Ace even offered to give Buggy information on where Luffy currently was. It was such a strange dynamic, but then again, so was meeting Shanks. Which was bizarre because firstly, Shanks somehow had 2 arms in the anime, but after some initial hostilities, they ended up throwing a party just like Buggy did. Shanks and Buggy, by the way, also 2 sides of the same coin, both with the same beginnings and ending up in the same place as emperors via radically different paths. And I think it's easy enough to figure out who represents comedy and who represents tragedy, which, it does not bode well for Shanks in the future. But brothers are a recurring motif in Ace's life. In addition to Luffy, Sabo, Shanks, and Buggy, Ace also had 1,617 other brothers, courtesy of the Whitebeard Pirates, one of which was Izo, which in retrospect must have led to a very awkward exchange when Ace said, "Hey, brother Izo, you know that the citizens of your homeland are being tortured on a daily basis by an alcoholic dragon, a BDSM bird, whatever the crap queen is, and a fish on a lawnmower?" To which Izo just replied, "Yeah, but I'm sure things will just work themselves out." And they did, because Wano is now free and Izo is now dead. But look, let's get down to the important moment here. I often make fun of Ace on this channel, which doesn't come from a place of hate. It's more about finding the comedy within the tragedy. I think that Ace is a heavily flawed character who made a series of unbelievably stupid decisions that ultimately led to his downfall. All fairly easily preventable, mind you. But that's also why I really like him. He feels real. Like just some guy who made mistakes and paid the price for it. And pun incoming, but you could say that Ace royally screwed up here and paved the way for Luffy to become the Pirate King. Despite how hard he strived not to become his father, Ace inherited one very key aspect of Roger, which, embarrassingly enough, was his prematureness. Roger arrived too early at Laugh Tale, and Ace arrived too early to fight Blackbeard. And very much in keeping with Ace's Ace's theme of twos, he arrived roughly 2 years too early, whereas Luffy was patient. Sorry, no, what I mean to say is that Rayleigh forced Luffy to be patient. But even so, a coin flip is an act of chance. It's not something that Ace had any control of in the grand scheme of things, because his fate was not sealed by deciding to pursue Blackbeard. Sadly enough, what really cemented Ace's death was an event that occurred in a time and a place that he was neither there for, nor did he have any say in how it occurred. That place is Jaya, an island rather appropriately and forebodingly shaped like a skull, and it was on this island that someone was going to be chosen to die. And that choice was going to be made by Luffy and Blackbeard. Because that's the thing about being one side of a coin. There's a whole different side out there whose actions are going to directly affect you. The threesome of Ace, Luffy, and Blackbeard are one of One Piece's most iconic menage a characters. Any action taken by one directly affects the other two, or I should say affected, past tense. Because our coin flip happened on Jaya. This was the moment that decided who would die, Luffy or Ace. Because originally Blackbeard had intended to capture Luffy and use his infamy to become a warlord of the sea and then initiate all of his dickbaggery. Very potentially killing him, because that's the thing about bounties that are stipulated dead or alive. The reason why Blackbeard left Ace alive was to conjure that war with Whitebeard. With Luffy, there's no such reason. He's a nobody. Or at least back then he was a nobody. And in the event that Luffy were to die, well, that's when the will of D acts up. Just like Ace's death was Luffy's wake-up call, Luffy's death would have been Ace's. He would accept his heritage and inherit his brother's dream to become the Pirate King, thus making Luffy the tragedy to Ace's comedy. But instead, what we got was the other way around. The incident with Blackbeard ended with Luffy escaping, which directly led to capturing Ace instead. And shortly thereafter, Ace would die on the battlefield right before Luffy's eyes, making Ace the tragedy to Luffy's comedy. Also, Ace died with a smile on his face, subverting the whole thing as Oda tends to do. But is there a world where both survived? I mean, on odd occasions, coins can land on their sides. I'm going to say probably not though. One big issue is that Ace's pursuit of Blackbeard was never going to be halted due to the fact that Blackbeard himself was pursuing Luffy. So when Ace discovered that, he felt he had no choice but to stop Teach right then and there. So weirdly enough, Luffy's freedom locks in Ace's future, or lack of future, unfuture. And then there's an even worse case scenario, because even if the coin lands on its side, that doesn't mean doubly good things, it could mean doubly bad things. There is a world where Blackbeard becomes the Pirate King because both events come true. He captures Luffy and Ace goes after him prematurely regardless, thus killing both brothers and leaving all of us at the mercy of a very unhygienic cherry pie overlord. And when put into, well, that perspective, the coin flip doesn't feel as bad as it could have been. But that's what Ace's life came down to. He was a man bred to be king. He had all of the genetic power, all of the fruit-based power, all of the wonderful mentoring, all of the inherited will, and even the backing of fate to do just the thing it is that he was born to do. By all rights, he should be the next Pirate King. But what can you do? Well, I know what we can do, because we are going to decide your fate. I am going to flip a coin. If it lands on heads, then you become the Pirate King. Wealth, fame, power, other things, it's all yours. Whereas if it lands on other heads, the frownier heads, then you die a horrible donut-related death. No time for second thoughts, let's go. Oh no. Well, good luck. And make sure to watch this next video because, well, look, no special reason, but just do it quickly.